Imagine a desecrated sanctuary, a landscape of fallen warriors, and at its heart, a lone figure radiating an ethereal glow. He traces a complex magical sigil upon the ground, his voice echoing through the ruins. Is anyone there? If you can hear me, give me a sign. Even a flicker of movement will do, he pleads, pouring the last of his immense magical energy into the search as a dreadful thought begins to creep in. It seems, I am all that remains. But as he accepts this grim reality, a sinister reflection appears in his eye, and a thunderous voice proclaims, "Behold, the man who unified the demonic hordes and drove humanity to the very brink of extinction." This was the one they called the High Priest. Elsewhere, amidst the chaos, a silver-haired mage was reciting a powerful, ancient incantation. He snatches an infant from a demon's foul grasp, teleporting it to safety. In this great war against the invading forces from the demon realm, the mages of the White Magic Tower had placed their absolute faith in this man, gambling the very future of their world on his leadership. Without their unified power, victory would have been impossible. Suddenly, a woman materializes in the heart of the carnage, her voice cutting through the din. For the official record, on April 28th, at 3:12 p.m., I can confirm the High Priest's life has been extinguished. The mages recognize her instantly. It is Edna, the last of the dragons and the designated chronicler of all cosmic events. Edna Sol approaches the leader of the White Magic Tower, informing him that she bears both good and ill tidings. In the classic manner of a seasoned mage, he requests, "Give me the bad news first." Edna nods grimly. "The demon army breached the defenses of your White Tower. To be blunt, the majority of your mages have fallen, and the structure itself is in ruins. All of their research, their life's work, it has all been turned to ash. The tower's master can only ask." "And the good news?" She replies, "The Imperial Army arrived ahead of schedule. They are securing the area and will see to any survivors, including your students." He coughs violently, a weak smile on his face. "That is a relief." Edna then asks, "Do you have any regrets about today's lesson?" He shakes his head. "No." He states that because of the one student he personally chose and guided, he could never feel regret in their presence. When Edna asks for his final words, the master looks at her, pleading, "Could you watch over my students for me? From time to time, they are still young, and their passion often outpaces their wisdom." Edna offers a solemn nod. "Of course, I will check on them." The man scoffed with biting sarcasm. "Imagine that, a dragon taking orders from a mere human." The dragon's voice rumbled in acknowledgement. "You are right to wonder. But this continent, and I personally, will never forget the sacrifices made by the White Tower." The man nodded grimly before finally admitting, "Fine. It would be a lie to say I have no regrets. I was the era's greatest mage, but admittedly, a terrible leader. But if I were ever given a second chance, I wouldn't care if the world branded me a villain. I would simply want to live for myself, free from the burden of my students and my duties." His only wish was for a peaceful life. With a heavy heart, Edna gently closed the Tower Master's eyes and announced, "At 3:47 p.m., I am confirming that the head of the White Magic Tower, Oscar Sage, has officially passed away." The news spread that the High Priest had eliminated hundreds of active mages, including the legendary level 9 Archmage Oscar Sage, who fell during the second Chaos Incursion. A soft breeze whispered through a colossal tower, where a young man with black hair lay unconscious in a bed. Watching over him was a white-haired figure. As a stray leaf drifted down and brushed against the sleeping man's hand, he jolted awake as if struck by lightning, his arm flailing wildly and striking a blue-haired man squarely in the face. The blue-haired man stumbled, spilling water everywhere. "I'm soaked," he yelled. "I was just trying to change your compress. You keep fighting in your sleep. It's incredibly frustrating, and you never show a shred of gratitude for my help." The other man stared blankly, his voice flat. "I was unconscious. Practically dead." He was completely certain his life had ended, vividly recalling the High Priest as the one responsible for his demise. He swore the man had pierced a hole straight through his heart. He tried to articulate this, but was unable to get a word out. Just then, an irritated, blonde-haired man stormed in, interrupting and shouting about him finally being awake. The blue-haired youth shot back, "Just calm down. He's only been conscious for about 5 minutes." But the older man completely ignored his plea, his focus solely on the man in the bed. He ordered Frank to leave, clearly intending to confront Oscar Sage alone, whose mind was reeling with a single, overwhelming question: "How am I still alive?" The elder's fury erupted, his voice a roar as he hurled the question back. "You find it fascinating that you're alive, do you?" All the while, Oscar's analytical mind cut through the haze with a chilling certainty. This man was undoubtedly a mage from the White Tower. He commanded the elder to explain the entire situation from start to finish, only for the old man to mockingly echo his words back. Visibly irritated at the prospect of explaining himself, he stomped forward, his hand raised as if ready to strike some sense into the boy. He bellowed that Oscar had better start groveling for his life, but Oscar, completely ignoring the threat, calmly changed the subject. About that attack, was it an assassin planted by the demons? I used a windshield, a spell designed to block virtually anything. The backlash alone should have rendered the caster's wrist useless, and yet the man was clearly some low-level mage. He was an amateur who obviously hadn't thought it through, which made Oscar wonder why his own windshield had failed so catastrophically. It had simply fizzled out, a pathetic display of magic. Unimpressed, the elder waved his hand dismissively. The shield was perfectly fine, he stated curtly, and I haven't exactly been sitting idle this entire time. He then began to mutter about filing a disciplinary action regarding some research, telling Oscar to focus only on his recovery. Frank urged the old man to leave, all the while wondering if Oscar had completely lost his sanity. But Oscar was trembling, the horrifying realization echoing in his mind. The shield failed the second I cast it. A new panic set in, as he wondered how long he'd been out. He had been unconscious. Frank just shrugged, offering a grim explanation. Yeah, that's just Elder Maxim for you. The implication was clear. He was in deep trouble. Oscar turned his focus inward, performing a self-scan and assessing his mana circles and their capacity. The purity, the sheer volume, it was all in shambles. He desperately needed to understand what in the world was wrong with his body. He finally asked the critical question. What day is it? Frank casually replied that it was September 21st, adding that he was only knocked out for a little while. Oscar's eyes widened in horror. Wait, I've been unconscious for 5 whole months? Frank could only stare at him in complete confusion. What are you even talking about? It's been less than a single day, Frank countered. Oscar dismissed it. All right, whatever. We need to get Lloyd on the line. If he's unavailable, find Gilly or Sasha. Someone has to know what truly happened here. Frank recoils, warning him to forget those traitors before becoming visibly agitated. He demands to know why Oscar is speaking so familiarly of the Tower Master, questioning if his memory has been damaged. Lloyd Schultz, he reveals, abandoned the White Tower to become a disciple of the Red Tower Master, and Gilliam Dominic. He stole an invaluable grimoire and vanished, and it's then that Oscar senses the unnatural stillness surrounding Frank. As he processes the impossible statement that Sasha is the Tower Master, he's left completely stunned. He thinks, wait, how could a 5-year-old child possibly achieve such a feat? His friend simply retorts, you're overlooking the 20 years of life she had before those 5. The mage dismisses it as a wild fantasy, wondering why he's becoming so incensed over a mere child. But the pieces clicked into place the moment he saw an unfamiliar face reflected in the window pane. Oscar's first instinct was to ask who that person was, before a horrifying realization washed over him. An unbelievable 20 years had passed since the day he had perished, and the world had been utterly transformed. The streets were now illuminated by glowing artifacts, and self-propelled carriages moved without horses. This was all the fruit of the magical engineering revolution, a sight he imagined the previous generation would have cherished. After all, when their world was on the brink of collapse, they had all but surrendered hope for the future. He pieced together the history of this body's original owner, a young man named Oscar Crushing. He was taken in by the Magic Tower at age 10, and is now 20, a mere level 1 mage from a disgraced noble family. For a 20-year-old, this level of achievement was, frankly, pathetic. In a desperate attempt to fast-track his career, he consumed a dubious elixir from a back-alley dealer, and as one might expect, he met his end almost instantly. A tragic but grimly logical outcome. If that elixir had been genuine, his magical power would have skyrocketed to unimaginable heights. Moreover, simply possessing the illicit potion was a death sentence, and a true elixir could have easily caused his body to rupture from mana overload. But then he sensed something was fundamentally wrong within his own body. He had to understand what was happening. He was channeling an impossible amount of power for a level 1 mage, and it was pure, unadulterated mana. He questioned if the dubious potion was the cause, but his thoughts were interrupted as a single drop of dark blood seeped from his finger. Oscar stared in disbelief as a viscous, black substance began to drip from the tip of his finger. When it touched the floor, it sizzled violently and evaporated into nothing. Oscar's eyes widened in horror, thinking, was that poison? And why was it coursing through his veins? In an instant, the horrifying truth began to dawn on him. First, the so-called elixir was a red herring. A genuine one would have cost a fortune, far beyond what the original Oscar could ever afford. The devastating reality was that poor Oscar had unknowingly consumed a potent poison. Judging by the corrupted blood, it was a massive dose. In other words, he hadn't perished in a brilliant flash of magical overload. He had been murdered by a poison potent enough to kill a level 1 mage 10 times over. If I hadn't awakened in this body, he thought, the truth of his murder would have been buried forever. Clenching his fist, the new Oscar rose to his feet. I have no idea who is toying with my soul, he muttered. But this new life is a second chance I won't waste. The original Oscar's dying wish was to live for himself, and inheriting that resolve was not a bad place to begin. So, as a token of gratitude for this borrowed life, he declared, I will deliver the vengeance you deserve. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Siren, a henchman reported, Boss, we have news from the shop. His boss, a man who demanded respect, replied coolly, You will address me by my title. The subordinate quickly apologized, but the boss cut him off, eager for the report. Spit it out. The man explained that the shop had been utterly demolished from the inside, apparently by a mage. The boss slammed his bottle onto the table. A mage? Who was it? He was hunting for the very person who had sold the elixir. Could it have been that kid, Elias? One of the thugs wondered. But his boss simply scoffed at the idea. Get real. The boss sneered. That bookworm isn't a fighter. There's no way he could have done it. The subordinate grew visibly anxious. But what if the White Tower starts investigating? He stammered, only to be silenced by his leader's menacing glare. Have you forgotten who paid us to handle Elias in the first place? He growled. He was showing off a White Tower ring. The kind exclusive to their mages, he continued, before a new voice cut in. Wow, what kind of moron is that obvious about their affiliation? The subordinate spun around, shouting, Who's there? A young man vaulted through the window and casually strolled right up to them. He thought, I just followed the potion's foul stench. Looks like this party is bigger than I anticipated. The boss shot him a death glare. Are you the one who wrecked my shop? He demanded. Elias just grinned back. That was me, but don't stop on my account. You guys were having such a captivating conversation, please go on, the boss grunted. So, you've decided to drop the act. He then bellowed to his crew. All right boys, get him. One of the thugs immediately charged at Elias, brandishing his sword. The young mage sighed. All right, if you're really determined to do this, I won't be the one to say no. He then flicked his wrist. A powerful blast of cutting wind surged toward the man, slicing him apart as his head hit the floor with a dull thud. Elias blinked, slightly surprised. Huh, can't believe it was that easy. The boss screamed out in rage. Bart! He then pointed a strange weapon at Elias, unleashing a torrent of insults before firing 3 rounds at our hero. Elias's interest was piqued. Well now, this is something a little different. He threw up a windshield, noticing the projectiles had 0 mana. He was intensely curious what kind of strange technology could power such a weapon. The boss screamed in disbelief. He stopped my bullets. Elias smirked. Hey, what did you call that thing? That's a catchy name you've got for it. Because I'm about to return them to sender, he quipped, flicking the projectiles right back toward the goon with his magic. The bullets slammed into his chest, gut, and leg, sending the man tumbling to the floor while swearing a blue streak. Elias strolled over, casually remarking that he had already cast a spell to mute every sound within the room. With the chilling realization that no one is coming to save him, the boss sputters in disbelief. How can a mere level 1 mage cast a level 5 silence spell? Oscar casually dismisses the feat, saying, Oh, this? It's just a simple sound link. Prevents you from screaming for help. But now that I have your undivided attention, I'd really appreciate it if you answered a few questions. For instance, who hired you to turn me into a human pincushion? The boss starts to hurl a defiant curse, only to be cut short by a swift kick that brutally rearranges his features, leaving Oscar to watch, unfazed. Wow, Oscar remarks coldly, your pride must be worth more than your life. Impressive. And just like that, another strange and terrifying spell envelops the man. In an instant, the man is consumed by a world of agony. As it turns out, Oscar has linked the very wind to his nervous system, creating the sensation of 1,000 tiny needles having a festival inside his body. But Oscar simply states, Look, I don't enjoy these kinds of games, so just talk. The man immediately starts begging, screaming for him to make the torment stop. Okay, I'll tell you everything. With a simple snap of his fingers, Oscar ends the spell. Deal. Now, talk. Tell me everything you know about your client. The thug confesses that a mysterious figure gave him a magical elixir and a very large sum of cash, instructing them to sell the potion to Oscar at a ridiculously low price. Naturally, they accepted the deal. So, what did this person look like? The henchman explains. He was wearing a hood. I couldn't see his face at all. But, he adds, he was definitely wearing a White Tower ring. Oscar raises an eyebrow, skeptical, thinking it's a classic misdirection. A trick designed to fool a simpleton like this. But the goon insists. No, it's true. The man had a strange, distinct smell. Like incredibly fresh mint. That's all I know. Oscar then shifts his line of questioning. And what was the plan after you? Took care of me? The boss replies, his voice strained. Man, things have been really rough. For the White Tower, ever since it was kicked out of the Big Four towers. I doubt they'd even investigate your death. Oscar feigns surprise. Wait, what are you talking about? The boss looks utterly confused. Wasn't that something you were supposed to know? Playing it cool, Oscar blames his apparent ignorance on the potion. Whoops, must have forgotten after I drank that elixir. The boss seems to buy it, telling him, just get the papers, man. As he starts rummaging through a nearby drawer, he slid the files across the desk, saying, here, these are the documents you'll need. Aiden's mind began to race. Alright, so this all stems from the White Tower, he thought. April 28th is designated as the White Night because some high priest met his end there, and among all the towers, it was considered the absolute worst. And they're planning a major announcement on this White Night day. Aiden recalled that the White Tower was hardly renowned for its magical innovations, remembering Edna's files, which specifically warned against this very sort of debacle. He looked up at the boss and said, all right, give me the complete overview. What are the actual functions of the 4 great magic towers? The boss began. The Yellow Tower of the West manages all electrical power. They initiated the entire magical engineering boom, producing all kinds of revolutionary devices. The Blue Tower of the South focuses on water purification, agriculture, and potion alchemy. And the Red Desert Tower of the East? They essentially operate as the military's magic division. They provide support on monster subjugation missions. Aiden pressed. Okay, so what about the White Tower? The boss replied simply, oh, them? They handle deliveries. The mage was utterly speechless. Wait, deliveries? You mean like a premium courier service for wizards? The boss confirmed. The White Tower mages can fly. This gives them a profound advantage in the rapid delivery industry. Aiden thought. What in the world is this absurdity? He pictured these mages gliding through the heavens like demigods, and it seemed they had become masters of the sky. They were being hailed as powerful symbols of freedom, completely eclipsing the grandeur of dragons and eagles. Aiden had to ask, who orchestrated such an outlandish public relations campaign? The boss replied, the new head of the White Tower. The mage thought to himself with a heavy heart. That must be my own misguided student. He then inquired about the agriculture business and drinking water, questioning if potions weren't supposed to be the main source of revenue for a magic tower, and how the Blue Tower managed to acquire a monopoly. The informant revealed that the Blue Tower had completely monopolized the potion market, a fact that stirred a distant memory in Oscar. He recalled that the White Tower was once the reigning power, before their most valuable, secret recipes were tragically consumed by flames. Now, the man explained, they were reduced to selling purified water at exorbitant prices and performing minor rain rituals for lands succumbing to drought. Oscar questioned why anyone would purchase simple water, and the informant confirmed it was the latest status symbol among the idle wealthy. The mage seethed with indignation, believing they'd been reduced to mere performers for a pittance when common wells offered the same. It was a bitter pill to swallow, realizing the White Tower had become a laughingstock compared to the other magical institutions. And it was true. While the other towers flourished, this upcoming festival represented their final, desperate chance for survival. The informant then gestured to Oscar's own frail state, and the mage was grimly certain the man was about to succumb to his injuries. With death fast approaching from shock and blood loss, Oscar weighed the fact that the man had provided valuable intelligence. He briefly considered saving him, but then the man's criminal history came to mind. A sordid past of arson and trafficking illicit goods. The list of his crimes was long, including extortion, and even arranging for the permanent elimination of his rivals. Deciding the man was utterly beyond redemption, Oscar launched himself through the nearby window without a single word. As he made his swift escape, Oscar's voice echoed back, try to be a decent person in your next life. Later, as dawn broke within the White Tower, he staggered into a secluded room, overcome with a profound exhaustion. He couldn't believe he was so utterly drained from casting a few simple spells, wondering what kind of fragile vessel he now inhabited. In this weakened state, he questioned if it was even possible to invoke the legendary time-space magic. This was the very power, the Wind Archive, that had once made Oscar the Sage, the greatest wizard in human history. But his attempt fizzled into nothing. He growled in frustration, realizing he had to strengthen this body first, beginning with a diagnostic spell. He needed to immediately gather a complete picture of his physical state, as his own memories remained a fragmented, chaotic mess. Even with the brief summary Frank had given him, it was critically important to uncover the full story of Oscar Cruchen. To prevent this body from breaking down, he had to understand its past as the heir of Count Crawford. He was the sole survivor of a devastating fire at their family estate, a tragedy that led the magical world to label him a boy genius. The hype surrounding him was extraordinary, with every magical society and club attempting to recruit the young prodigy. 6 years later, he enrolled in the Imperial Magic Academy, but his brilliance was confined to theory. He failed every practical application. The revolutionary thesis he published was undeniable proof of his staggering intellect. It was a baffling contradiction. How could a mind like that be stuck at level 1? The official reason pointed to a case of terrible luck. He was diagnosed with mana deficiency syndrome, a condition that grounded him despite possessing the potential of a legendary mage. The former poster boy for his generation, Oscar now mumbled to himself, mana deficiency syndrome, huh? If that diagnosis was true, it would perfectly explain his predicament understanding magic better than anyone, yet unable to cast a single spell. Oscar confirmed the scan was complete, but as he reviewed the results, he knew something was fundamentally wrong. He didn't have mana deficiency at all. Completely floored, Oscar realized this wasn't a disease. It was a seal, as if someone had deliberately clamped a magical restraint on his circuits. Mana deficiency syndrome is an inability to store magic. Even with an incredible 20 circuits, a person with that affliction is stuck at level 3, their magical output almost non-existent. Oscar Crawford's situation, however, was a completely different story. His magical system wasn't inherently broken. Someone had intentionally blocked the flow of his power, and if this young man was the genius everyone believed him to be, then he must have known his diagnosis was a lie. It would have been convenient if he'd simply noted that in a journal. Something like, "Dear Diary, someone sabotaged me." But according to Frank, the original Oscar Crawford was a hopeless alcoholic. This sparked a new theory. What if the original Oscar was merely playing a role he had created for himself? What if he was fully aware that his circuit was sealed, and simply leaned into the persona of a spoiled, broken failure? If that tragic story were true, it would explain everything, especially why he would risk it all by drinking that forbidden elixir. Frankly, in his position, you wouldn't trust a soul either. The original Oscar had to shatter his own chains. Me, on the other hand, I just need to reconnect a few circuits, and then it's showtime. While looking around, I stumble upon one of Oscar's old books. It's marked up beyond belief, a complete reimagining of fundamental magic. So, of course, I immediately begin to read, and man, I start to see everything from a completely revolutionary perspective. Some notes even claim that mastering wind trajectory is a total snooze fest, and that windshield, a spell intended for defense, could be used to absolutely demolish an opponent if you properly analyze the flight path of their weapons. I'm thinking, hey, this guy's advanced. Windshield concept is almost identical to what I was already doing. It's on a completely different level from the usual throw up a shield and pray mentality. On top of that, he had written an entire playbook detailing its use for every conceivable situation, and there were dozens of basic spells he had simply invented himself. The irony? He couldn't actually cast a single one, but he had run every single experiment perfectly in his head. I finally understand why they called him a genius. We're basically on the exact same wavelength in how we interpret magical theory. And seriously, just from this one journal, I can tell this kid never, ever gave up on magic. He worked harder than anyone. His passion is practically screaming off the pages. Reading his final sentence, it said he hopes this book echoes through the faintest breeze of the White Tower. Coming from a mage who was facing his own final battle, I realized he knew. He knew everything that was happening, but he still endured all of it, completely alone. Oscar, I mutter, rising from my chair, thinking, this kid was a true fighter who refused to tap out, even when fate dealt him an absolutely garbage hand. He just walked that lonely road, all by himself. I collapse onto the couch in the room, and I swear on my title as the 17th Master of the Magic Tower that I will untangle the knot he never could. And for good measure, those responsible for clipping his wings will face their reckoning. The next thing I knew, I was walking through a greenhouse. I wandered around, trying to piece together how I had arrived, and then it hit me. I had completely passed out from exhaustion. The last thing I remembered was performing a kind of magical neurosurgery on my own internal circuits. Suddenly, I heard a voice calling for their master, and there I was, my former self, Oscar the Sage, deep in discussion on the floor with my devoted disciples. My immediate thought was a weary sigh. This wretched dream curse again. Some demon loyal to the Nightmare Viscount had afflicted me with it. It forces me to relive scenes from my past every single time I fall asleep. I was genuinely hoping the affliction wouldn't follow me. I thought the curse might have been left behind when I transferred bodies, but apparently not. This thing is fused to my very soul, not just my mortal vessel. Still, I can't help but wonder if this is a blessing in disguise, since my memories of my students remain perfectly clear. These aren't just sentimental trips down memory lane. When the students ask what their teacher would say, I am right there with the answer. I found myself explaining that while all magic originates from the same source, it is fundamentally divided into different properties. These include enhancement, acceleration, and balance, among a host of others. Lloyd chimed in, noting the White Tower champion's harmonization. His master replied, precisely, affirming that wind magic is, without a doubt, the superior form. Sasha then asked if every magic tower was elitist about their preferred magic type, and Oscar began to elaborate. He explained how certain magical affinities simply align more naturally with the philosophies of specific towers. The Golden Tower, for instance, has an insatiable need for speed, so they are entirely dedicated to acceleration magic. The Red Tower is consumed with fire, so they naturally specialize in enhancement, while the Blue and White Towers, they strive to maintain equilibrium with the balance type. At this, Gillyard loudly declared that he had better get acceleration magic. He exclaimed that slow abilities were the absolute worst, but Oscar simply stated, tough luck, kid, you don't get to choose. It's something you're born with. Sasha wondered aloud how one is supposed to discover their innate ability, and her master assured her it was far simpler than she imagined. He instructed her to just extend her index finger and channel her magic, a simple command for all the girls. Even though this is her very first time and it's taking a moment, her master is incredibly patient about it. So she channels her magic, and as it manifests, she exclaims that something is happening. Oscar identifies it as the harmony type. The little girl's eyes light up with excitement, and she eagerly asks if it's just like her master's. He gives her a warm confirmation, and she beams, declaring that she absolutely loves it. Next, Juliet gives it a try, and his master announces that, just as he'd been whining about, his is the acceleration type. The young boy breaks into a victory dance as his master finally calls for Lloyd. Sasha gasps that it's a gorgeous flower, and Oscar explains that this indicates a special type. Lloyd immediately asks if it's possible to swap it out, even after it has been locked in. His master is baffled, explaining that it's an incredibly rare type found in less than 1% of all mages. Questioning why on earth he'd ever want to trade it, the kid simply says he'd much rather have the ordinary balance type. He wants to be just like his master, but Oscar starts muttering to himself, wondering what to do now, since he was totally planning on giving Lloyd extensive private lessons, and now he wonders what the point would be if he just gives him a new type. The boy's ears immediately perk up at those words, and he repeats, private lessons? Which his master confirms. Indeed, special types require significantly more one-on-one time with their instructor, and with that single piece of information, the kid decides the special type isn't so bad after all, but only if his master promises. They seal the deal with a pinky swear, and Oscar thinks to himself about that little schemer, Lloyd. His nickname might as well have been Mr. I Have a Deal. But no matter how much he carried himself like a tiny adult, he was still just a child at heart. Suddenly, a radio on the wall crackles to life, blaring, paging all mages. This is a transmission from the radio room. We're looking for the mage, Oscar crushing. Report to Laboratory 4202. He groans, wondering just how long he had been so preoccupied. To make matters worse, after he finally unlocked his mana circuits, he found only 8 physical circuits left. He possessed a mere 2 mana lines, branding him a pathetic level 2, as he bitterly contemplated his fate. Who in their right mind would be proud of reaching level 2? At that moment, Elder Maxim arrived, asking how he felt. According to Frank's report, he no longer looked like he was knocking on death's door. Oscar approached and agreed, receiving a nod from the elder. He couldn't help but inwardly smirk. This elder was technically his junior. That was Elder Maxim Bisk, a spring chicken at 45 years old. Oscar recalled how Maxim had joined the tower long after him, yet here the man stood, aged and holding the title of elder. He had always been an honorable man who worked relentlessly, so Oscar knew he was probably destined for a respectable future. The man used to trail him like a lost puppy, first calling him senior, and later, master of the magic tower. Oscar had to admit, there was a certain charm to how hard he worked, especially since his own magical principles were considered archaic. Maxime noticed his slight smile, and asked what was so amusing before immediately turning to the business at hand. He mentioned a report regarding Chief Gordon's family, stating they were reacting as if their entire world had ended. Maxim pressed him for more information, but Oscar feigned ignorance, claiming he had no idea why the chief had passed away. Of course, this was a blatant lie. considering it happened because Gordon tried to arrange Oscar's permanent retirement. The elixir was tainted, and shady deals had been struck to ensure his demise, all for a bit of coin, and to take him off the board. "Is that why you did it?" Maxim asked. Oscar replied bluntly, "I tried to negotiate, but they preferred turning me into a human pincushion." He added that the money was 100% legitimate, with a contract in the ledgers to prove it, and Maxim simply nodded. "Understood. It was self-defense. The matter is closed." Oscar felt a wave of relief, then asked the elder for a personal favor. He explained that he urgently needed to meet with the master of the magic tower. The elder closed his eyes, replying, "That shouldn't be too difficult." Maxim explained he was already scheduled for a detailed magical consultation with her. Oscar thought to himself, "I used to be Sasha's most trusted advisor." Then, the elder delivered the crushing news. "You can see her in about 6 months." The revelation left Oscar utterly floored. Realizing it's the very night before the festival begins, Maxim explains the circumstances. She's away on a critical business assignment, prompting Oscar to wonder why the leader is personally handling such errands. He mutters to himself that some other mage must have failed spectacularly, a thought he finds utterly pathetic. He reasons it's because of that incompetent mage that Sasha had to go herself, then asks, "Sorry to pry, but what is her power level, exactly?" Maxim reveals that she's a level 7, and the boy scoffs, thinking to himself that at her age, he had already reached level 9. He muses that she has a long way to go, considering that, with her talent, she should be a level 8 at the minimum. The elder assures him they'll handle the paperwork, then asks, "So, you've been practicing your little light shows again?" Oscar merely shrugs. "Only when the mood strikes," he replies vaguely. The elder waves a dismissive hand, telling him, "All right, get out of here." Just as the young man is leaving, another figure strolls up to the door. Maxim inquires, "What brings the vice president of the magic club here?" Hamel Glimwitz chimes in, "Hey now, don't be so hard on the boy," before trailing off with a thoughtful, I suppose I'm too late," he remarks. The elder replies sternly, "He causes trouble. He gets a lecture." Hamel concedes, "Fair enough. But I was the one who brought him here," Hamel adds, a soft spot for the boy evident as he reflects that even the simplest spells require more than a day or two to master, and he knows the kid has been training tirelessly in secret. He then affectionately calls Oscar a little brat, realizing the boy is putting in far more effort than he ever lets on. Hamel then suggests they head to their elders' meeting, noting that Fidelina is probably growing impatient waiting for them. Meanwhile, Oscar makes his way up to the 10th floor, driven by a recent dream in which he saw his students and felt a sudden urge to visit. He notes that the entire place feels like a ghost town, just as a gardener quietly wanders over and speaks. "Well, if it isn't young Master Oscar," the gardener greets him. The boy simply looks at him blankly and asks, "And who are you?" The gardener introduces himself as Walter, explaining that he is responsible for managing the facilities of the magic tower. It seems, Walter thinks to himself, that the rumors about Oscar's memory being completely wiped were true after all. Recalling their frequent chats, Oscar asks just how much the rumor mill has been churning with gossip lately. He then questions the formal title, Young Master Oscar, prompting Walter to explain that he's been working there since the original Tower Master's time. Since Oscar Sage himself was in charge, Walter clarifies. The young man is visibly surprised, letting out a soft "huh." "That's a clever way to tell us apart," Oscar notes with a slight grin. "I'm definitely stealing that." He then asks if their friendly chats can continue. Walter gratefully acknowledges the offer, but gently turns it down, explaining that he's about to punch his retirement clock for the final time. When Oscar asks about his plans, the old man says with a heavy heart, "I've been rooted in this place for 40 long years. I served under 3 different masters, and my co-workers were a constant revolving door of faces," he continues wistfully. "But through it all, I was the last one left in my department." The reason he remained for so long, he reveals, was due to the former master. Oscar Sage once said something profound at a ceremony. "Every single person in this tower is essential to its very core." Oscar clears his throat, and the old man concedes, "I know it might sound a bit sentimental, but from that day on, I worked with everything I had, feeling as though I was truly a part of the team," he says with pride. "Hey, that's not sentimental at all," Oscar insists, but the old man just smiles. "Sentimental or not, my time here is over." Oscar then presses him on his meaning, but Walter's expression grows serious. "Look, kid. You're aware the tower's been scraping by lately. Our resources are stretched thin, especially with our gear," he explains gravely. "The coffers are basically empty. And to top it off, next month marks my 40th anniversary here." Oscar's eyes widen as he connects the dots. "Wait, is this about the long service bonus?" The one where all tower staff except for us mages receive a medal and a cash prize? The reward you get on your 20th and 40th year. So you're due for 200,000. Oscar finishes, his voice trailing off as Walter just sighs in response. Yes. About that, Walter says quietly. The tower is so financially strained, we can't possibly afford a sum like that. For them to raise that money, a number of people would have to undertake incredibly perilous, life-threatening jobs. I simply cannot have that on my conscience. I don't care what anyone says, he states with firm resolve. This place is my second home. Oscar is left speechless, contemplating the old man's sacrifice. I never realized the situation was this critical. I knew the Azure Tower was resorting to questionable methods for funding, but who was I to pass judgment? They had figured out how to turn a profit and were reaping the rewards. Meanwhile, what did I possess? A collection of grand titles. War hero, savior of humanity. They look impressive on paper, but those honors haven't brought a single coin into this tower for decades. Just then, Wilter's voice broke his train of thought. Hey, why are you trying to crush your own hand? He asked. Oscar then countered, so, when are you planning on leaving? The old man revealed it would be in about 2 weeks, then instructed the young master to head to the infirmary. He needed to get that cut looked after, but Oscar shot back. I was hoping you would stick around to be my companion. Because you're not leaving, I'll make sure of it, he vowed silently. Okay, I need a plan to get rich, and I need it immediately. A scheme to make a fortune, to ensure this never happens again. But then he wondered, how could he possibly manage that? His life was consumed by research, reading, and missions, but the problem was that any payout from those activities would take far too long. On top of that, he was still only a level 2 mage. He needed a job that offered a substantial income. It seemed potion brewing was his only realistic opportunity. Then, while scanning the newspaper, something clicked into place. He remembered an event he had witnessed back inside the Vice Master's office. Elder Fidelina was seething. We can't just ignore this. It was blatant fraud, Maxim tried to interject. Well, it was wrong, but the elder cut him off. What do you mean, wrong? The old man simply replied calmly. The culprit is taking time to reflect on his actions. Fidelina scoffed. You're just going to let him go? Thievery is a habit that only worsens, she insisted, but Maxim casually waved her concern aside. Don't you worry about it. It's not like there's much of value to steal around here anyway. The woman huffed. You argue with every single thing I say. Just throw the boy in isolation. But the old man shook his head, calling the idea ridiculous. It makes absolutely no sense to put a level 1 kid through an ordeal like that, Hamill finally added. Elder Maxim interjected. Isolation training might be too severe. It would be a major setback for the boy's progress. Instead, let's just make the boy repay 3 times the money he took. The elder snapped back. Is a mere 3 times supposed to be enough? Seeing the argument spiraling, Hamill swiftly changed the topic. Speaking of money, we have practically none left. We need to devise a solution. And quickly, especially with all of these facilities sitting unused. If we sell the potion-making equipment, she offered, we could probably afford to eat for at least 3 months. But Hamill immediately shot the idea down. I will not allow it, the woman appealed to the Vice Master, but he stood his ground firmly. This is a magic tower, he declared, a place where mages come to study the arcane arts and share their knowledge. You can't just lock the doors and give up. We cannot sell our entire future just to deal with today's empty stomachs. The elder sneered. What future are you talking about? We have been waiting for that so-called future for 20 years, Maxim shouted her name, but the woman simply told the Vice Master to get real, because even if some unparalleled genius were to exist, they certainly wouldn't be wasting their potential with us. Hamill opened his mouth to argue, but was immediately silenced when the elder spun around and demanded to know who was brazenly interrupting their very important meeting. The old man simply waved him in, and Oscar strolled into the room. He greeted the elders with a dramatic flair, but the Vice Master cut him short. Spit it out, Oscar. What do you want? And Oscar announced with a calm smile, I have a small business proposal I'd like to run by all of you. The elder nearly doubled over with laughter. A business proposal? That's quite rich. Coming from the man who borrowed from our research funds a few days ago. Now this mage wants to become an entrepreneur? Oscar, completely ignoring her, continued. I stumbled upon something quite interesting while I was digging through some archaic newspapers regarding how the state of 20 is completely on lockdown, thanks to a particularly vicious flu. Hamill chimed in. Oh, right, I saw that. The word is that it's the Cadena flu. If that's true, it's the worst possible news. As it stands, there is absolutely no cure for the Cadena flu. Long ago, the White Tower possessed the world's only vaccine, but the formula was tragically lost about 20 years ago. Precisely. Oscar confirms. Even the Azure Tower, the undisputed masters of the potion market, couldn't replicate it. And that's where he enters the picture, boldly announcing his intention to begin producing Cadena flu vaccines. He declares that since the White Tower once held a lucrative monopoly, he wants a share of that market. Fedalina can only scoff at his audacity. She argues there's no reason to entertain the fantasies of a boy. The Magic Tower, along with every pharmaceutical company, has poured mountains of gold into research, yet no one has cracked the code in 2 decades. But of course, we should believe this 20-year-old upstart is the one who can finally succeed. Oscar simply retorts that yes, everyone else did fail. He acknowledges that he is just a 20-year-old man, but he is also a genius who surpasses them all. Fidalina's patience wears thin, as she points out. He has already squandered 723,000 coins, plus an additional 25,000 on questionable substances, while a simple farmer might earn 20,000 a year. This supposed genius, she fumes, knows nothing of value. But Hamill intervenes. He addresses Elder Fedalina directly, reminding her that Oscar is present to make an official investment proposal as a mage of the White Tower, and that she is the one who controls its finances. He states firmly that her current attitude is completely out of line. The woman offers a curt apology, which is when Oscar speaks up. "You know, I was wondering about your hostility towards me," he muses. "But it makes perfect sense, given that you are the treasurer, and for the past 2 years, I've essentially been living on your charity. Nevertheless," he says, "I am entirely serious about this. I only ask that you consider it." Internally, however, his thoughts are clear. The weakling who once inhabited this body and I are 2 entirely different beings. Hamill then asks if he is certain it's the Cadena flu. 100%, Oscar replies without a hint of doubt. Turn to page 2 of that newspaper. The elder complies, her eyes scanning the article about an archbishop. Baldwin has abruptly changed his pilgrimage itinerary. Oscar notes that he intends to remain in Suriran for an entire month, supposedly for blessings, which is highly unusual. Who spends a full month in the major cities for that purpose? The El Terra cult is dedicated to the worship of the planet's mother goddess, Terrara, and is led by 7 archbishops who are purported to be incorruptible. But that's a complete fabrication. In reality, it takes a fortune in donations to ascend to the rank of cardinal. He claims he is staying in the state for a month to visit the various pilgrimage sites, but his true purpose is to network with nobles and merchants, lining his own pockets. Now, Siren was once a prominent city. Maxim interjects, noting that even if the city's influence has been waning, it's still significant. The official reason must be the prayer for blessings. Oscar cuts in, which is precisely what makes the situation even more suspicious. They are conducting prayers over the region's barren lands, and as everyone knows, the El Terrara pilgrimage route is set in stone. The path goes through Siren, Mosque, Melbourne, and Greenvale. But immediately after, they are required to proceed to the state of Vince. Oscar adds that the archbishop also lingered in Knox for a month, just before arriving in Suriaran, and unless I am gravely mistaken, he also secluded himself in Mosque for a full month, which strongly suggests he is avoiding the state of Vince as if it were contaminated. After all, if something were to go wrong during his sacred journey, the Semstaff followers in Altera would undoubtedly blame it on angering the goddess, a narrative that would come directly from the archbishop himself. Maxim realizes that Baldwin is aware this plague is the true Cadena incident, and questions why the situation is being so prolonged. Oscar confirms that's the official story being circulated. The old woman chimes in, "Not bad for a well-read mage, but let's table that discussion for now." Hamill then says, "I understand the situation you're describing, but my hands are tied when it comes to official sponsorship. We simply do not have the mages to spare for such a task," Hamill explains, before dropping a bombshell. "So, I will personally fund it this time." The elder lady is utterly stunned, crying out in protest about the Tower Master, but Hamill remains calm. "It's fine. It's only 30,000. 100 coins. That should cover it. Right?" Oscar echoes the number, thinking, "Not even close, buddy." He then storms off to the potion lab, muttering, "All right, time for plan B." He figures he'll whip up a basic vaccine with the cash he has on hand. Then, he'll squeeze the rest out of the archbishop. After all, the man is in the hot seat over this Cadena flu pandemic. Shaking down a desperate man for cash should be a piece of cake. "All right, let's get this party started," he thinks, just before spotting something. A strange red potion is bubbling out of a flask. He grins. It's showtime. Finally, after his work is complete, he inspects the result. "Hey, not half bad," he thinks to himself. "They say a real pro never loses their touch, but he just concocted an aura energy drink on a whim." and was secretly terrified the entire time that it was going to explode in his face. Frank screams, "My back is literally about to snap in two." Oscar casually asks, "Did you get all the herbs?" And Frank retorts, "Duh. Now, have you got anything to drink? I feel like I'm going to pass out." So, the young mage hands him the energy drink. His friend chugs it down. "Oh, thank you, man. That's good. And it's warm? How'd you whip this up?" Oscar just shrugs. The ingredients were top-notch. Frank puffs out his chest with pride. "Yeah, I picked out the absolute best." The vendor was seriously ticked off, he adds. The mage replies, "With an eye for quality like that, you could totally be a merchant instead of a mage." Frank brightens. "Funny you should say that. I was planning on it, for when this whole tower eventually goes belly up." But his thought is cut short as Oscar slams his fist on the ground. "God, I just couldn't resist," he mutters. Frank, completely confused, asks, "So, what do you need me to do, Elder?" "Fidalina told me to help you out." Oscar thinks to himself, "That woman is a menace," while outwardly telling him, "Start moving those ingredients." He continues grumbling under his breath, "I don't even need a babysitter. This whole White Tower is crawling with problem children. They certainly have talent, but a mistake is inevitable. Still, if these young prodigies actually mature, they could become invaluable allies. And among them is Frank Sirius." Oscar already knows the boy is sharp, but a deeper curiosity is stirring within him, and this is the perfect opportunity to truly test his potential. Frank breaks the silence. "Hey, all of these herbs we purchased, they're all highly toxic. We have lilies of the valley, red camellias, ghost mushrooms, and marival leaves." A knowing smirk plays on Oscar's lips. Just because they're poisonous doesn't mean they can't be used for medicine. You understand that much, don't you? But Frank counters immediately. "Yes, but the standard procedure requires steeping them for 12 hours. "You're not wrong," Oscar concedes. "However, there's a critical flaw in that method. All the vital essences are boiled away." "Tell me, Frank, have you ever heard of the steamed buns from the Yan dynasty?" The boy nods. "Yes, I've read about them. You need a specialized smoker to prepare them correctly." Oscar's grin widens. "Bingo. And the principles behind that same device are precisely how we're going to purify these herbs while preserving all their potency. With this technique, they can extract a staggering 98% of the active compounds from the ingredients." Frank is stunned. "Wait a minute. If you can do that, you could single-handedly dominate the entire potion market." But Oscar simply shrugs it off. It's just an old-timer's technique." Frank then asks, "So, is the detoxification process complete?" The mage shakes his head. "No, not even close. We've merely prepared the ingredients to make the truly difficult work more manageable. The real challenge begins now, with a delicate bit of air-draining magic." He explains that he must now isolate and extract the toxic elements from the vapor, one by one, instructing Frank to observe him carefully. The remaining vapor will be rendered completely pure, and will be able to collect the isolated toxins with absolute precision. 23% from the red camellias, and a solid 47% from the marival leaves. And just like that, you have the cure for the Cadena flu. He jests that it was remarkably simple to create. Oscar then claps his hands together decisively. "All right, your turn." Frank screams internally. Easy for you to say. He can barely manage to control 2 spells simultaneously. But his pride won't let him admit his failure at dual casting, so he awkwardly pivots, asking about the spell as Oscar sizes him up. "Your mana control is a bit shaky, but not a complete disaster," Oscar observes before adding, "But that's all you've got. Is something wrong?" Frank finally breaks. "Are you kidding me? I can't dual cast. You need to be a level 4 or 5 mage for that kind of technique. And I'm just a lowly level 3, he finishes. But Oscar just smiles and says, "Don't worry, I'll teach you." Frank's eyes widen in disbelief. "You're going to teach me the secret technique?" Oscar lets out a small laugh. "It's not that big of a secret. Just imagine splitting your mind into 2 separate tabs, like on a computer. On the left tab, you focus on casting spell A, and on the right tab, you focus on casting spell B." He gives Frank a light push forward. "Go on, give it a shot. What's the worst that could possibly happen?" So, Frank stands there, muttering to himself, "Brain tabs. Right." And then suddenly, with a poof, he successfully casts both spells, clearing the smoke and shouting in pure shock. Oscar gives him a slow, impressed clap. "Nice one. You actually did it." The blue-haired mage then questions why the masters keep such a simple trick hidden for so long, and Frank explains, "It's simple. They're greedy." He reasons they don't want to share because it's a massive inconvenience to teach. Training rookies for free is a hassle, so it just became an unspoken rule. But when things get ugly on the battlefield, tradition goes right out the window. Out there, you have to share your secrets every single day just to stay alive. The White Tower, he argues, desperately needed to modernize and implement some kind of knowledge-sharing program. Oscar is genuinely impressed with Frank's first real battle of wits, thinking to himself, wow, this kid actually possesses some real talent. I never expected him to master it on his first attempt. Frank, trying to act modest, replies, well, you're a good teacher. The older mage just smirks. You seemed a lot grumpier a minute ago. With newfound confidence, Frank gets a determined look. We still have a mountain of ingredients left. Let's get back to work. Oscar lets out a long, weary sigh, looking at his surprisingly hyperactive new partner. All right. Fine. With that giant distiller on hand, they decide they might as well process the whole batch in one go, a plan the young man is all for. A few hours later, Frank looks as though he's wrestled a griffin, while Oscar is tallying up a grand total of 514 finished bottles. Suddenly, Maxim bursts through the door yelling, "We've got a problem." Frank, barely conscious, just manages to ask what's happening. Maxim shoves a document in his face. The Azure Tower's apothecaries have just confirmed they are visiting the capital in 1 hour. And they're bringing Archbishop Baldwin, Maxim groans, lamenting that they were just a fraction too slow, while Oscar's mind starts racing. Fantastic, he thinks. We were just stalling for time with absolutely no plan. Then, the old man says, if we can just get to them first, Frank finishes the sentence. Otherwise, all of this excruciating work is completely worthless. Maxim pats his back, telling him to keep his head up, that sometimes life just kicks you down. But before despair can set in, Oscar cuts in. Hold on, it's not over yet, he says with sudden clarity. If I remember correctly, the Cadena flu is officially a rank B disaster, right? And if that's the case, I have a crazy idea we can try. Maxim's eyes light up with a glimmer of hope. Seriously? Oscar just nods and asks, so, old man, you think you can fly faster than a horse-drawn carriage? Meanwhile, over in the capital city of Siren, a knock at the door all but announces the arrival of his appointment to Archbishop Baldwin, who remains as cool as a cucumber. He simply tells his attendants to let them in. In walks Marine, a high-level 5 mage from the ever-prestigious Azure Tower. Accompanying him is Director Neil Brand, and Marine begins by thanking the Archbishop for receiving them on such short notice. Baldwin, who is probably yawning internally, tells the pair to have a seat, and Marine thanks him once more for his time. Then, the Archbishop gets straight down to business, asking how their little Cadena flu medicine project is coming along. Marine puffs up his chest with an air of accomplishment. Oh, it's going swimmingly. Baldwin's response is dry. I would expect nothing less. He then asks the million-dollar question. So, when will this miracle cure actually be ready for distribution? The question catches Marine off guard. He starts hemming and hawing, explaining how they are still in the critical phase of clinical trials. Neil jumps in, his voice sounding like a rehearsed press release, saying, once we get some conclusive results from our testing, they will secure full imperial certification from the Ministry of Health and Medicine. Moraine, attempting to artfully sidestep the issue, began, as you know, Your Grace, these clinical trials are a meticulous, multi-stage process. But Baldwin cut him short. Yes, I understand. When will it be done? Cornered, the Azure Tower's representative finally admitted it would be ready in approximately half a year. Baldwin's response was chillingly calm. Half a year? My friend, I depart for Vince in 4 months. That timeline is simply unacceptable. As Moraine began to stammer a defense, Baldwin's attention was drawn away. What is that disturbance outside? His guard reported, Your Grace, another mage is here to see you. Baldwin turned a cold gaze upon his guests. And you didn't think to mention you brought company? Moraine immediately grew flustered. He apologized profusely, swearing they had come entirely alone. All 3 men now fixed their eyes on the door, wondering who could possibly be interrupting. Suddenly, the doors swung open, and a young man named Oscar strode in as if he owned the cathedral. If my memory serves me, Elsia is the proper salutation, is it not? He introduced himself as Oscar Crushing, a level 2 mage from the White Tower. He announced he was there with an offer that the Archbishop could not refuse. Baldwin was unimpressed. Then, speak boy. A confident grin spread across Oscar's face. I am here to sell you the cure for the Cadena flu. The Archbishop's eyes lit up with sudden interest. Well, isn't this a fortuitous turn of events? These gentlemen were just speaking at length about that very subject. Oscar inquired if he had arrived too late, but Baldwin dismissed the notion instantly. Not at all. Especially considering these two have offered me nothing but delays and excuses. Oscar visibly relaxed, beaming with relief. Because the White Tower, he declared, is prepared to finalize a deal, here and now. Moraine lost his composure entirely, shouting, "That is an absolute lie. The White Tower is bankrupt. They lack the resources to cure a common cold." The Archbishop, unfazed, calmly asked the young man for his surname again. The young mage replied, "It's crushing." The cleric then looked him directly in the eye, his gaze sharp and penetrating. "So, tell me truthfully, do you actually possess this cure?" Oscar placed a hand over his heart, feigning a deeply wounded expression. "Archbishop, would I dare deceive a man of your stature?" With a flourish, he presents a small case. "Behold, a sample of our work." Baldwin, ever the pragmatist, cuts to the chase. "This trial size is impressive, but let's talk business. If we reach an agreement, can you produce this in mass quantities?" Moraine attempts to interject, but a sharp glare from the cleric silences him. "What are you even doing here? You've arrived completely unprepared." Scrambling for a response, the mage blurts out, "Well, we have yet to secure official approval from the Empire's Health and Safety Commission." He then spins toward Oscar, with a smug look on his face. "And I'll wager you lack Imperial approval as well, don't you?" Oscar simply replies, "No." A triumphant grin spreads across Moraine's face. "Aha! You see, the White Tower is in precisely the same position we are. We'll be ready for mass production the moment we get the green light." But Oscar interjects smoothly, "Yes, but you must remember, my friend, you are speaking of the White Tower." Moraine puffs his chest out once more. "And considering the Azure Tower's long and glorious history, it is obvious that we are the ones who should spearhead this project and develop the definitive cure." Oscar lets out a soft chuckle. "It's truly amusing to hear you lecture me on the history of the Azure Tower, especially when you're standing before a mage of the White Tower." Moraine's face flushes with anger as he tells him to back down. But the young mage is undeterred, because if you consult the historical records, you'll find the White Tower was established first. The man from the Azure Tower sputters, attempting to dismiss the gap as merely 5 years. A smirk plays on Oscar's lips. "Oh, just a small difference, you say? It's funny how that small difference is the very same gap that every leader of your tower has desperately tried, and failed, to close for generations. A gap you couldn't bridge in 10,000 years. That is simply History 101. And I suppose you've forgotten who dominated the potion trade a mere 20 years ago?" Moraine scoffs. "That's ancient history nobody remembers." But his dismissive tone only serves to ignite Oscar's fury, who just echoes, "Nobody remembers?" Then, with a chilling calm, he adds, "Now that is certainly an interesting perspective." Meanwhile, the members of the Azure Tower could only stare, completely overwhelmed by the sheer concentration of power in the room. Just as Oscar declares his intention to give them all a history lesson, a secretary bursts into the room, her face flush with apology. She interrupts, announcing an urgent call, and a tense Baldwin immediately demands, "Spit it out. Who is it?" The secretary reveals it's none other than the Lord of Vince, whose voice on the other end is gushing with unrestrained gratitude. He praises the Archbishop's immeasurable kindness, a sentiment Baldwin can only repeat back, his confusion evident. Then, the Lord of Vince drops the bombshell. They have received the cure for the deadly Cadena flu. Apparently, the head of the White Tower claimed they developed it discreetly, keeping it completely under wraps. He insists all credit belongs to the Archbishop, as every single patient was back on their feet within a matter of hours. It was, he declared, a flat-out miracle, and as he speaks, a knowing smirk begins to spread across Oscar's face. Baldwin, attempting to maintain his composure, calls it great news before cautiously inquiring about any potential side effects. The Lord reports there were zero, zilch, nada. It was incredible. His tone then shifts as he asks when they can expect the second shipment. He explains that he already asked the representative from the White Tower, who completely passed the buck, directing all inquiries to the Archbishop. The Archbishop, as smooth as ever, promises to send the next batch as soon as it's ready, assuring him it won't be long. After the Lord thanks him profusely and hangs up, Baldwin immediately pivots, his sharp gaze falling directly on Oscar. "Was this your doing?" he demands. Oscar simply confirms with a, "Yep," adding that everything seems to be going according to plan. At this, Morris absolutely loses his composure, slamming the table and yelling that this violates all established medical laws and that Oscar will be finished. Oscar just scoffs at the outburst, dismissing him as a clueless novice who doesn't understand the real rules of the game. He then condescendingly asks if Morris understands the first thing about how to win a war, prompting Morris to snap back. "Don't change the subject." Oscar internally reflects that this institution needs at least 20 years to mature, recalling that the greatest killer in the Demon War wasn't a weapon at all. Instead, it was a good old-fashioned pandemic, one that raged on even as mages produced treatments with factory-like efficiency. Obtaining FDA approval was a notoriously slow process, which is why His Majesty implemented Article 42, Clause 8, into the legal code. This provision permits the use of special treatments during wartime, though Moyer points out that this loophole rarely impacts how the Empire and the FDA typically operate. He argues that they aren't currently at war, but Oscar calmly refutes his point. Oscar explains that there are 3 specific scenarios legally defined as wartime. The first is a conventional conflict with another species or nation. The second is an internal revolution, and the third is the occurrence of a Class B disaster or higher, such as the Kadena flu. The flu is a textbook natural Class B disaster, which is precisely why it wasn't necessary to navigate the FDA's bureaucratic red tape. Neil, struggling to keep up, declares that if the White Tower could do it, so can the Azure Tower. He insists they will immediately dispatch their cure to the state of Vince, which only earns him a weary sigh from the Archbishop. The holy man laments their failure to grasp the mess they are in, stating the race was over the moment the White Tower's cure arrived in Vince. Baldwin lays it out plainly. The Lord of Vince already believes he was collaborating with the White Tower from the very beginning. It would be politically impossible for him to reverse his position now and suddenly begin promoting the Azure Tower. Neil's next ill-conceived idea is to simply lower their price, but this only serves to deeply offend the holy man. The Archbishop asks how Neil dares to try and purchase his reputation with money. As they begin to protest, the man cuts them off. "Enough," he declares, refusing to hear another word. He then orders them both to leave his presence at once. Moyer's face is a mask of pure fury as he rises to his feet. On his way out, he mutters a vow to make Oscar pay for this humiliation. Oscar, meanwhile, can only think to himself that Moyer sounds like a villain straight out of a cheap novel. He then nonchalantly drops a bombshell, revealing that he has already registered the patent for the treatment. Not just the treatment, but the vaccine as well, filed directly with the palace. Moyer spins around, his face contorted with rage. As Oscar looks on coolly, "If you want the real cure," Oscar tells him, "you'll have to pay the licensing fees to the White Tower. Otherwise," he adds, "you can just throw those potions of yours in the trash." Hearing this, the level 5 mage practically grinds his teeth to dust and storms out. Fuming, Neil offered the Archbishop a curt farewell and then gave Oscar a passing nod before he departed. As he left, Oscar caught a strange scent lingering around Neil, instantly recalling the mastermind's mention of a very specific aroma. It was described as fresh and crisp, almost like mint, and that was the only piece of information he had ever been given. Oscar stared at the now empty doorway in stunned realization, a conclusion so profound it caused the Archbishop to erupt into laughter. He invited the young man to have a seat, announcing with a broad smile, "Very well, let us finally discuss the terms. We must negotiate the price," he continued, "particularly since the Azure Tower and Newark were only asking for a paltry 2 million coins." Oscar simply grinned and countered, "If that is their offer, then let's present them with a cool 5 million. At this, the Archbishop completely lost his composure, howling with laughter and demanding to know if the boy was being serious. A few hours later, back at the White Tower, the news of the deal left everyone utterly speechless. The elder's eyes bulged as he screamed, "That was 10 million coins!" He repeated the figure in pure shock, while Oscar simply observed with a calm smirk. Fidalina rushed in to embrace him, thanking the young prodigy. As Maxim proudly proclaimed, "I knew you possessed this capability the entire time." Hamel, looking completely bewildered, demanded, "That's insane. You have to tell us exactly what happened in there. Even the Archbishop cannot simply produce that kind of money," Hamel argued. Oscar replied smoothly, "Oh, that sum included the additional fees." The master's ears perked up. "Additional fees, you say?" Then the young genius laid out his entire scheme involving commercial licensing fees. "Are you serious?" Hamel asked in disbelief. The boy just nodded, explaining, "The White Tower making an official announcement is like a divine decree. It's a mandate to prepare these antidotes with the utmost urgency." But the true leverage was his ambition to become a cardinal. He claims to have received a revelation from Mother Earth, so the title of Archbishop suddenly seems inadequate to him. Oscar elaborated, "I played on that weakness entirely. He wanted to pay 1 million coins for the agreement, and in return, I promised to deliver the vaccines and antidotes within 1 week. Hamel was dumbfounded, muttering, "That's unbelievable. Our punishment was to repay 3 times what was stolen," he said, "but you have returned with more than 400 times that amount. With a sum 1,000 times greater on the table," she declared. "I believe we can consider this disciplinary matter concluded. Does anyone object?" Fiddleneck was completely on board, so the Vice Master turned to Oscar. "Listen, kid," he offered, "if you need backup, you come to me. Oscar seized the moment, replying, excellent, because we need to assemble a group of level 4 or higher mages, and we need them immediately. Hamel was all in, announcing she would scout for volunteers, and telling Elder Fidelina to prepare a joint announcement with the magic tower. The woman seemed hesitant, asking, and what precisely am I supposed to say? But the master laid out the entire plan for her. Just announce that potion production is hiring mages, level 4 or higher. They will be compensated, and this is the key, they'll get a free meat dinner. A few hours later, the potion lab was swarming with mages, all of them buzzing with excitement about the promised meal. Many claimed it was the best news they'd heard in ages. Oscar clapped his hands for attention. All right, settle down, seniors. If I could have your attention. His words were met with dead air. They were ignoring him completely. So, with a snap of his fingers, he cast a subtle sound spell, and suddenly all the seniors winced. What is that horrible buzzing sound? One complained. Oscar's voice cut through. Glad I have your attention now. The reason I've summoned you all here, he announced, is to mass-produce the antidotes for the Cadena flu. And for that, he admitted, I desperately need your help. A murmur of whispers immediately rippled through the students. Why is the fallen genius here? One muttered. Is this another one of his elaborate medical scams? The raw hostility floored Oscar. He turned to Frank, asking quietly, do they have a problem with me or something? Why? Frank deadpanned. Dude, maybe you should take a second to reflect on every single thing you've ever done here. Your personality is memorable. It was true. His past self had been an absolute menace. He was once a notorious big shot who burned through the tower's funds, produced zero research, and essentially treated his position like an endless party. Oscar began to wonder if he had really been that much of a wreck. Just then, a young woman with blonde hair walked up to him. Hey, she began. Can I interrupt for a second? Considering the White Tower's secret formula for production has completely vanished, she was desperate to understand how they planned to accomplish anything. Oscar simply replied with unnerving calm, we got the recipes back. Whispers continue to ripple through the room, but the blonde girl steps forward, pressing him for an answer. She demands to know if they've actually proven the antidote works, and that's when Creston interjects to confirm that it does. He adds that the contract with the Order is already signed and sealed, causing the blonde girl's eyes to widen in disbelief. She breathes that such a deal must be worth a king's ransom, realizing that if word gets out, the entire arrangement is finished. She asks if he's insane enough to entrust them with such a monumental secret, but Oscar simply shrugs and says, honestly, I have no idea why any of you are still here in this tower. The blonde girl fires back. Excuse me, is that the way you address your seniors when you're begging for a favor? You have just wasted my time, and I don't know what kind of game this supposed genius is playing. But newsflash, nobody here asked for your speech. But Oscar just says, oh, but I know. I know exactly what every single one of you sacrificed to stay at the White Tower. The blonde woman is completely floored as he begins to flawlessly recite her personal history. Lena White, a level 5 mage, 25 years old. You had 7 different organizations, practically begging to recruit you, all because of your extraordinary talent for judgment, and you turned down every last one of them. He then gestures to the others. Herakdrian, 26, and Desert. Renee, also 26. And we can't forget Sophia Rose, 23, a true prodigy of alchemy. Oscar then adds, and almost everyone else here received offers that were just as impressive. If a deal like that landed in my lap, I honestly don't know if I could have said no. But not a single one of you abandoned this place. Lena, still stunned, finally speaks. She asks if the elders are involved in this secret arrangement. Oscar nods, explaining they had no other choice if they wanted this to succeed. He continues that the last thing they wanted was to burden the students. The White Tower is currently experiencing its most brutal and bone-chilling winter in its entire history. And with circumstances as dire as they are, you all chose to endure it in the freezing cold. If I can't place my faith in people like you, then who can I trust? Then, who in the world can I possibly trust? He adds, before casually remarking, but hey, if you're not into it, no hard feelings, you don't have to help. Frank just grumbles under his breath. Oh, here we go with the phony act. But Oscar speaks right over him, announcing, anyway, the level 2s have to get to work. His friend shouts out, hey, that's me you're talking about. Oscar simply tells Frank to get a move on, explaining he only needs 2 of them to get the operation underway. Lena just stares at Oscar for a moment, her expression unreadable, then begins to put on a protective visor. She clears her throat, steps forward, and asks, so, should I just grab a pair of these safety goggles? Then she follows up, asking what they need to do to get started. Sophia immediately seizes the moment, calling out, All right, everyone. You heard her. Let's get to it. Frank just stands there, thinking to himself, I have to be dreaming. There's no way he just convinced all these people with one speech. The mage merely shrugs. It wasn't half bad, but I should probably mention beforehand that the meat we're having isn't pork. The students immediately start guessing. Is it chicken? Please don't say it's rat. Then, the mage announces, it's beef. The entire room erupts in cheers. And just like that, the vaccines and antidotes were successfully created. They hit a whopping 140% of their original production goal. Fast forward 1 week, and Oscar is taking a stroll through the greenhouse when he spots flower petals on the floor, immediately thinking, is this the handiwork of old man Walter? He must be back. I bet Hamill tracked him down and dragged him back here. He then sits down at a table inside the greenhouse and picks up a newspaper to read. The headline declares that the Vince territory has officially announced the end of the pandemic. This came just 2 days after the Cadena flu antidote was released, and sure enough, Oscar Cruising's name was being thrown around as a candidate for the Peace Prize. Oscar thinks to himself with a smirk, all according to plan. Just then, Frank rushes in, already on the phone with his friend, and completely freaking out. He stammers that the situation is unbelievable, with vaccine orders blowing through the roof. Did you even see the list? He asks. The desert territories, the entire order, even the imperial family are buying in. Millions are basically pocket change at this point, but Oscar just shrugs it off. Well, duh. Everyone needs it. Frank tries to be the voice of reason. He points out that the initial hype is bound to die down, but the mage just pats his head condescendingly. You're so clever for figuring out that demand is explosive at first. Crucian, the blue-haired swordsman, then asks who would even purchase them years from now. Oscar simply replies that they don't need to worry about the money part, because, and here's the kicker, he has already created different tiers of potions for every single stage of demand. Frank just loses it, screaming, you actually had a plan for all of this? He thought they were selling the legendary star-tier potions from the rumors, but Crucian immediately shuts that notion down. Nope, we're selling the cheap stuff, he clarifies. Low and mid-tier. It isn't time to play our strongest hand just yet. The star tiers are those legendary regeneration potions, the secret treasures of the White Tower, the kind of miracle elixir that can practically snatch a soul from the gates of the afterlife, and producing them would be an insane undertaking. But Oscar knows that releasing such a thing now would just attract a pack of greedy hyenas, all trying to get their hands on his secret recipe. He's safe for now, shielded by the Archbishop's protective ward, but he still needs to get stronger. All right, he announces. As I was saying, it's time to go hunt down some very specific materials. Frank is utterly confused. When did you ever mention that? Oscar nonchalantly lists off lantern leaves and pistols. Frank immediately starts complaining about how impossible that task is, to which the mage replies, aren't those your specialties? But the blue-haired swordsman disagrees. Yeah, maybe a long time ago. He explains that it's been a hot minute since those specific herb fields even existed. Frank complains that Oscar must be genuinely insane this time, for dragging him all the way out here on a baseless hunch. Then, Crucian chimes in with his own grievance. Why are we walking? There's a perfectly good carriage right there, he grumbles. But the young mage just smiles knowingly. The carriage couldn't take us any further, so just hang on a bit longer. We've already trekked for a good 10 miles. We should be almost there. Frank, however, couldn't help but ask, why are you using a measurement that went extinct ages ago? Oscar, looking completely clueless, replied, wait, we don't use miles? His friend had to clarify that all distances are now measured in meters. That's been the standard ever since the war, and pounds were replaced by grams. Frank mused that they even changed the currency from pounds. While they were a total nightmare to calculate, he admitted that doing all that old-school math had a certain charm to it. He confessed to missing miles and pounds. Shaking off the nostalgia, Frank spotted a cabin in the distance, wondering if it was occupied. Just then, the door creaked open, revealing an old man. Did you two seriously walk all the way out to this place? He asked with disbelief. Frank sighed wearily. Yeah, the carriage could only bring us to the entrance. At that moment, Oscar tensed up and asked, hey, what's that sound? An extravagant carriage, packed with men in formal suits, then rolled up to the cabin, parking callously right on top of a flower bed. A man in a sharp suit stepped out and addressed the old-timer. So, have you decided to sell your land today? Or are we wasting our time? The old man, consumed by rage, stormed out of his cabin and stood nose to nose with the suited man, his face a mask of fury. Isn't it about time you stopped being a complete imbecile? The suit sneered. The old man fired back that it was never going to happen. Not unless you're willing to part with that miserable castle of yours, he retorted. Devoir Pavol, the businessman, scoffed that the stubborn act was only cute in the beginning, but if you continue to live like this, he warned with a cold edge to his voice, no one will ever give you the time of day. Ivan, the herb master, snapped back, that is none of your damn business. Devoir tried to feign concern. Listen, I'm doing this for your own good. Just hurry up and sell the land. Go and enjoy a comfortable life, because the value of this land is about to crash. But Ivan just laughed, a dry, humorless sound. That's rich, because as long as I am here, you will never get a single permit for those factories of yours. The businessman's smug expression froze for a few seconds. He then barked at his men to get moving, but as he was walking back toward his opulent ride, he paused. He stopped as if he had just remembered something trivial, mentioning that he might have accidentally crushed some of their precious herbs. Having been forced to pay, he tossed the cash onto the ground. In the car, Dorian grumbles that the men with the old farmer were from the White Tower. He demands to know their business there, and his lackey stammers that it involves herbs because they've been making a killing off new vaccines. The boss asks exactly how much of a killing, and his goon silently hands him a newspaper, confirming it was a massive fortune. Dorian scans the article, then violently smacks his subordinate across the head while seething with frustration. And you're only telling me this now, he thinks, realizing that, if the old man gets official backing from the White Tower, he will refuse to sell the land for years, a delay that would completely derail all of Dorian's ambitious plans. He immediately gets his fixer on the phone, who answers instantly. Dorian asks if he still has the contact information for those freelancers they researched, because it's time to put them on the payroll, he states. His subordinate nervously asks which specific crew he was referring to. He worries they might be recognized for their work, but his concern only earns him another sharp crack across the head from Dorian. We just need to make the old man disappear, Dorian muses aloud. Then we'll simply report him missing and seize the land. He acknowledges the plan might look a little suspicious, but with his connections, it's a risk worth taking, even as his subordinate speaks up. What if the White Tower stays involved with the farm? If all 4 of the great magic towers become invested, handling Ivan is going to become an absolute nightmare. But Dorian just scoffs at the notion. What could possibly happen? He sneers. That whole 4 main magic towers legend is ancient history. The White Tower is practically crumbling into dust anyway. Meanwhile, under a clear night sky, Frank is stretched out on the grass, remarking that the old herb farmer was a total lifesaver. He was a true champion for letting us stay for the night, Frank says warmly. He even fed us. Oscar just smiles up at the starry expanse, agreeing. He remembers Ivan insisting it was far too late to be traveling and that it was much safer for them to stay put with him. Frank had asked if he was certain, but the old man simply stated he had a sworn duty to the White Tower to protect its own. Oscar is still pondering the gravity of that vow when Frank breaks the silence, asking, so, who was that character from earlier today? Ivan's expression darkens as he explains, a nasty piece of work named Dorian. He's known for threats, and he even made people vanish 3 years ago. He initiated a land-buying frenzy, acquiring every available property except for Ivan's small plot. Consequently, a great number of residents simply abandoned the town. When Frank asked why, Ivan gave a single, stark reply. Factories. Oscar then questioned why he endured it, and the old man grinned. That clown can't touch me. He's at a severe disadvantage. I am what's known as a living cultural heritage of herbal cultivation. Frank's eyes widened. Whoa. So you have protection from the royals? The old man confirmed it with a nod. Oscar then asked, so why not just sell? You'd make an astronomical amount of money. Ivan replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Because I love this land. It has been my home since the day I was born, and it will be my home until I'm 6 feet under. Oscar remarked that he was a good man, and Frank added that it was amusing when he got flustered and rushed back inside. Frank then looked up at the sky. But the stars out here are absolutely incredible. It almost makes me jealous. His friend asked what he was jealous of. Frank confessed that he'd always wanted to live a life that could shine as brightly as a star. But I'm sure a genius like you wouldn't get it, he said. Oscar immediately countered, you're completely underestimating yourself. His friend just offered a quiet thanks, even if he privately thought the praise was just a collection of empty words. Oscar insisted they weren't, stating firmly that he was not the kind of person who says things he doesn't mean. He thought to himself that for the life of him, he couldn't understand why his younger self had ever perceived this guy as a problem. Frank, oblivious, simply sighed. Man, the stars are gorgeous, Oscar replied. A long time ago, you could see the stars just like this, right from the middle of Siren. He mused internally that now, the city was so bright at night from all the streetlights, you couldn't see anything anymore. It's a real loss for all the romantics out there, he finished. Frank then asked how long ago that was, and expressed his serious hesitation. doubts about whether Oscar could actually revive the entire herb business from its ashes in Surrey Aaron. Oscar replied confidently, "Hey, it's totally achievable. We just need to successfully persuade Old Man Ivan." He was suddenly struck by an odd feeling from the room, leaping to his feet as Frank questioned his abrupt movement. "Whoa, man, did you see a ghost or something?" Frank asked, but Oscar's reply was grim and certain. "No, people. 4 of them, to be exact." Frank was perplexed, admitting, I didn't feel a single thing." Oscar thought to himself that for a mage with respectable power like Frank to miss them, these intruders must be experts in concealment and up to no good. He urged his friend, "Get on your feet, we've got company." Just then, a man strolled in, nonchalantly popping a huge bubblegum bubble as he asked what their problem was. He complained that they had been completely ignored after being hired to, quote, retire the old man, and that Deborah had been a total coward. An older assassin grunted, "Who cares? If the job pays, we do it." The bubblegum chewer pointed out that their target was a big shot up north. He even had a bounty on his head, though he'd successfully laid low for a while. At that moment, a man in a red jacket stepped forward, silencing them. "All right, that's enough idle chatter. Don't get sloppy," he commanded, while a shooter named Jack muttered under his breath. "They have to be mages," Jack guessed. And the older man replied, "Hey, as long as they're from the White Tower, we're in the clear. Those other factions are a real nightmare to deal with," he added, as a green-haired man began impatiently spinning a key. "So, are we going to do this or not?" he asked, thinking the silence was suspicious and that the old target might already be taking a permanent nap. He crept cautiously toward the bed, finding the whole situation boringly easy, lamenting that there were 0 mages to fight. What a total letdown. But then, his eyes caught something strange, and he let out a string of curses as he spun around. A voice calmly addressed him. "My, you're a sharp one," Oscar said, unleashing a wind bullet that struck the green-haired assailant directly in the head. Oscar emerged from beneath the blanket, casually boasting, "You know, this wind bullet of mine is remarkably handy. It's a small spell that a brilliant young prodigy, myself, cooked up in my personal remix of basic magic," he explained with a smirk. "It's a completely fresh take on wind magic, and I have to say, its power to put people to sleep is far greater than I anticipated." "Excellent. Now, there should be 3 of them remaining," he calculated to himself. But as he did a quick head count of the figures in the room, he realized something was wrong. Wait a minute, there were only 2. From the side, Jack roared, "What did you do to Max, you magic freak?" Oscar simply shrugs. "Oh, he's just taking a nap in there. He'll probably be snoozing for a good long while. You know, like forever." The old-timer scoffs. "Pathetic idiot. I told him not to get cocky." Jack, already over it, demands, "Where's the herbalist?" "Honestly, I couldn't care less about Max." Oscar realizes these 2 skip the usual trash talk and get straight down to business. Real professionals. He warns them, "All right, fellas, let's talk this out." But Jack isn't having it. "Talk? Nah, I'd rather see some action. Gramps, do the thing." And just like that, the old man lunges with a dagger, which smacks harmlessly against a shimmering magic shield. The blade is knocked aside, and Oscar uses that split second to charge forward. The old man just turns with a chilling smile. "Not bad, kid. Impressive." As Oscar closes in, the geezer readies his spear for another go. While Oscar prepares a spell, the old man's spear suddenly splits into 2 separate blades as he cackles. "Pretty neat toy, huh? Too bad your luck just ran out." "The game's over, kiddo," he says, aiming directly for Oscar's forehead. The young mage just casually flicks a finger, sighing, "Man, this is even more boring than I thought," and unleashes his magic. He adds, "Seriously, this is just pathetic," as a powerful gust of wind slams directly into the blade. The old man's mind reels in disbelief. That's impossible. Even caught by surprise. I shouldn't be getting overpowered like this. But Oscar's attack is a thing of beauty, shattering the weapon into a million pieces. As Oscar comments, "A unique weapon doesn't mean much when it's an antique." But just then, his internal danger sense goes haywire. Oscar instinctively leaps back, realizing the old man was taunting him for getting careless right after his apparent victory. Then, bam, a projectile fires, hitting the old man squarely in the head before ricocheting straight toward Oscar. It just delivers a glancing blow, leaving a minor cut on the kid's face, and Jack sighs. Ah, what a waste. Because if Oscar had been distracted for even half a second longer, his story would have ended right there. Oscar taunts him about his fallen comrade, but Jack coldly dismisses the man as just hired muscle. Utterly replaceable. The young mage thinks to himself, "This is exactly why villains get such a bad name," before asking aloud, "So, what's the deal with that little gadget?" Jack takes offense. snapping. Don't you dare call this a toy. This thing cost me a small fortune. Oscar replies calmly. Let me guess. An acceleration enchantment and a penetration spell? 3 spells, all integrated into that one device. The redhead is completely stunned. Whoa, how did you know that? Oscar answers with a flat stare. Because I couldn't block it, genius. A smirk crosses Jack's face. Cocky, aren't we? But you've certainly got the talent to back it up. Ever thought about joining my crew? The pay is outstanding. But Oscar pushes himself to his feet, his rejection clear. Nah, I'm good. I'm fairly certain my conscience would give me trouble. Jack chuckles. Fair point. Anyway, enough of the pleasantries. Oscar vaults behind a line of fences, his mind racing. What kind of beast was the former Magic Tower Master, if he was actually able to dodge this insane weapon? My own wind bullets are practically moving in slow motion compared to his projectiles. To be blunt, I am in serious trouble here. My mana is half depleted, and my only opening is the tiny sliver of time when Jack fumbles to reload, which takes him precisely 1.4 seconds. The mercenary strolls across the field, taunting, "Where did that little rat scurry off to?" As Oscar calculates his attack, I have one shot to end this in 1.24 seconds. He then unleashes his acceleration magic, blasting toward his target like a bullet. Jack spins around, startled. Whoa, you really are fast, kid. But no mere human can outrun my trinity. With that, he fires a shot directly at Oscar's magical shield, a smug look spreading across his face. It's over, he thinks. But then, the projectile impossibly curves around the barrier as Oscar continues his relentless advance. Jack's mind can't comprehend it. How? He shouldn't be able to outrun that shot with acceleration magic alone. Was it the shield? He wonders, just as the young man thrusts an open palm right into his face. Jack sputters in disbelief. How can a low-level mage possibly do that? Frank simply retorts, honestly, would you even understand the principles if I explained them? He lets out a heavy sigh, reflecting on the brutal fight. The victory had come at a cost. He'd been forced to use a particularly troublesome piece of equipment. So that's what they call the Trinity, 3 distinct spells layered onto a single weapon. That artifact was the only thing that saved me. I would have been completely annihilated otherwise. My strategy was actually quite simple. I generated intense friction to rapidly degrade the durability of the enchantment on my defensive barrier. The outer layer was designed to be malleable, while the core remained rigid, allowing it to absorb the impact and prevent the projectile from ever breaking through. If that desperate gambit hadn't worked, I'd be the one taking a permanent dirt nap right now. The very first thing I'm doing when I get back to the tower is researching how to enchant modern weaponry. I can't afford this kind of vulnerability again. I'm truly feeling the harsh limits of this body. And it's painfully obvious that to rescue Aiden, and to do it safely, I need more power. But hold on, there was that other presence I sensed at the beginning of all this. Since I've already taken care of 3 of these thugs, I'm desperately hoping that Aiden hasn't been captured yet. He just needs to hold on a little longer. The young mage then turns to the old man. You go on ahead, he insists. Ivan hesitates, asking, what about you? Frank replies, this guy's a bit more than a handful. I can't go all out with you in the line of fire. Get to safety, and I'll catch up shortly. Ivan gives a grim nod. All right, I'm counting on you. Be careful. As the old man leaves, the mercenary smirks. Are you two finished with the tearful goodbye? Frank stares back, unfazed. Aren't you going to chase him? The bandit lets out a derisive scoff. Nah, I'll let the old geezer run. It's more fun that way. Besides, you were always my real target. But I have to ask, what's the big deal? Why is everyone so damn terrified of mages from the 4 great magic towers? He then brandishes his sword, a predatory gleam in his eyes. I guess it's time I find out. Let's start by taking down the squishy wizard. With a ferocious roar, he lunges forward. Frank fires off 2 rapid wind blasts, but the man contemptuously bats them aside with his sword. With a smug grin, the assailant lunges forward, claiming it's too easy before thrusting his blade toward Frank's chest, urging him to make the fight more entertaining. He mockingly questions if that's the extent of the famed prowess from a supposed elite mage of the 4 great magic towers. But a strange sensation overcomes him, the feeling of his blade meeting no resistance, like pushing a knife through empty air. The expected feedback of steel-piercing flesh is completely absent, and the situation turns bizarre as Frank calmly catches the blade with his bare hand. In a fluid motion, Frank unleashes a slice of wind that strikes just beneath the man's chin, sending him collapsing to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Oh, my apologies, Frank murmurs, a faint whooshing sound echoing from his chest. My body just reacts differently, you see. Even Frank appears stunned by the outcome, as his opponent falls face first into the dirt. Meanwhile, Oscar has been observing the entire confrontation from a safe distance. With his own weapon drawn, Oscar muses to himself, "Well, it seems Frank is a rather unique individual, isn't he?" He instantly recognizes the ability, a blessing from the god of wind, allowing Frank to transform any part of his body into an intangible gale. And since one cannot physically strike the wind, a man possessing such a power is, for all intents and purposes, invincible to anyone without magic or an aura-infused blade. Oscar had only ever encountered such a phenomenon in ancient texts. Those legends spoke of the seventh master of the tower, a uniquely gifted mage who was born with this extraordinary natural talent. But never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that Frank, of all people, would possess such a rare and powerful gift. Now, Frank has his undivided attention. "Hey, when did you get here?" Frank asks, breaking the silence as Oscar approaches. "Nicely done, champ." "I was getting worried," Oscar says with a reassuring smile, before his tone shifts. "So, where did Ivan run off to, while you were enjoying your moment of victory?" The question jolts our hero, who suddenly remembers the old man with a start. "Oh no, where is he? He should have returned by now," Frank says, panicked. Meanwhile, Oscar is already calculating, if I train this kid properly, his unique wind ability could be more valuable than dozens of high-ranking mages. He then points Frank in the direction of Ivan's faint life signal. They find the old man, who is immensely grateful, explaining that without their intervention, he would surely be dead by morning. Frank, ever humble, deflects the praise, insisting, "I didn't do much, it was all Oscar." However, the nearby maid is quick to refute his claim, admitting he was thoroughly outmatched by the swordsman, and that without Frank, they would have all been defeated. He then mutters a complex incantation in Latin, causing Frank to flush beet red upon hearing the mumbled words. "Ah, well, it's all over now," Frank says, but Ivan quickly counters, "Not so fast, kid." He explains that Devore isn't the type of scoundrel to simply give up. If hired thugs don't work, he'll just concoct another plan. Frank questions why the man is so obsessed with that particular piece of land, prompting Ivan to explain the reason. It is the largest and most fertile plot in all of Siren. You see, the region's soil has been degrading for the last 8 years. Because of this, magical engineering factories have appeared, dumping their toxic magical byproducts into the river daily. This pollution makes the land even worse, as there's no simple way to restore the contaminated soil. Without that land, he lacks the power to cultivate his herbs. Oscar then interjects, stating he has a question for the old man. He wants to know if Ivan's unwavering loyalty to the White Tower is connected to a promise made by its fourth master. Ivan is stunned, asking, "You know of Reinaldus?" Apparently, it's an old tale passed down among the herbalist community. A very long time ago, people regarded them with intense suspicion, essentially labeling them as witches and warlocks. Since no one understood the properties of the herbs, the herbalists would simply boil them and sell the resulting mysterious brew. Consequently, the herbalists remained isolated, living as wandering nomads, until a true hero finally emerged. This figure, a legend in their eyes, was the fourth master of the White Tower, Reynold Ace. He told the herbalists to gather their belongings and travel to Siren, promising it would be an eternal sanctuary for them, a home for them and their children who loved the art of herbology. Oscar adds, where they would not be treated like conquered outcasts. Ivan marvels at what a profoundly moving speech it must have been, to which the young man simply responds, "Yes, I read it in a history book," likely picturing the ancient, dusty tome chronicling the lives of the Tower Masters. The old man then reveals the result. Following that promise, every herbalist on the continent began to make their way to Siren, and for the first time in their history, the wandering peoples had found a true sanctuary, the White Tower. It had granted their ancestors a home and legitimacy, forging a debt of loyalty they would never forsake. Oscar met his gaze with a steady, appreciative look, a silent acknowledgement of his unwavering service over the years. He then assured him that the White Tower would stand behind him. Ivan pressed, "All right, so what is this brilliant plan? Because if the royal family discovers we desecrated a historical site, their wrath will be swift. But for now, our hands are tied, since the imperial family's bureaucracy moves at a glacial pace. And what happens if Devil completely loses control?" But Oscar cut him short. "Oh, the imperial family will move with surprising speed, especially since I'm about to leverage a cure for their royal ailments." Meanwhile, inside Devoir Paul's office, chaos erupted. He was screaming at a subordinate, furious over a catastrophic failure that had just occurred. Their entire operation was on the verge of collapse, and once they fled, his underling would likely be facing a grim fate. Suddenly, the door was kicked open, and soldiers stormed in, shouting, "Freeze!" Their commander stepped forward to introduce himself. The name is Walker, Director of Imperial Internal Affairs. You must be Devoir Paul. You are under arrest. The charges include attempted murder, bribery, conspiracy to commit theft, and the destruction of a priceless cultural heritage site. Devoir scoffed. Whoa, you have the wrong man. I am a respectable citizen. But Walker simply told him to save it. Yes, we will be the judge of that. Internally, Devoir panicked, thinking, I'm in too deep. If only I could contact my patron, I could make this entire situation disappear. He turned to a guard and asked, Hey, could a man get a cigarette? Walker remained stone-faced for a moment before barking an order. Cuff him and get him out of my sight. Devoir began to shout, You're making a grave mistake. You have no idea who is protecting me. Walker merely smirked. You're right, I don't, he replied coolly. But the man who backs me is the Emperor himself. Is your associate more powerful than His Majesty? With that, a soldier snatched the unlit cigarette from between Devoir's fingers. Lighting a cigar, Walker muttered with grudging respect. You have to hand it to them. These crooks have good taste. His subordinate spoke up. Sir, I have a question. Who's the big shot that got us dragged out here on a day like this? But Walker just exhaled a plume of smoke. Orders from the top, kid. Apparently, our Emperor is a massive White Tower fanboy. This is all high-level drama, so don't worry your head about it. I don't even get the obsession myself. Sure, they were heroes, but that was 20 years ago. If you toss a bird with a broken wing into the sky, the only thing that changes is how fast it plummets to the ground. And the White Tower simply doesn't have the clout for this VIP treatment. He turned to his subordinate. How old are you, kid? I'm 23, came the reply. You were 3, Walker grunted. You were just 3 years old back then. I was 12, right when humanity finally got a chance to breathe. That was after we finally beat back the demons. And now, I'm just left wondering what in the world the White Tower even is anymore. Because the legend I remember no longer lives up to the hype. He flicked his cigar. Alright, let's bounce. We've got one more house call to make. His subordinate whined. Oh man. I thought this was the last stop. So, where are we off to now? He asked, to which Walker replied, We're heading west to shut down some factory that's been dumping its waste. We'll handle that, and then we can finally go home. The subordinate thought to himself, Great, something else just got piled on my plate. He really didn't know the first thing about the White Tower, Oscar Crucian, or Frank, to be honest. Walker, however, made a mental note to repay them for taking care of that shooter, Jack Gang. His subordinate then asked again, So, can we get food on the way? But Walker immediately shot the idea down. In another part of the city, Oscar was clapping Frank on the back. Great job, Frank. Frank was already asking if they could grab a beer, but the new guy with them insisted, We have to report to the vice leader first. Frank started to argue, but his protest was cut short when the vice leader himself began shouting for Oscar from behind them. The interruption left the blue-haired kid completely baffled, muttering about how this ruined his plans before he stormed off in a huff. Hamill remarked, I thought I saw Frank for a second, but maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Oscar's reply was a blunt, Nope, the Vice Tower Master was correct, but he had to leave for an urgent matter. The old man sighed. It seemed there was always some 5-alarm fire with him, and he figured the young magic prodigy must have performed another miracle. Having already received the full report in his office, Oscar mentioned that he was already on his way over, so they rode the elevator together toward Frank's quarters, and Oscar couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Hamill cut directly to the point. Have you heard from Frank? The young man said no, then asked, Why? What's happening? And then the old man dropped the bombshell. He had received a formal message from Frank's family. They are officially recalling him home. Oscar was taken aback. Did he actually agree to abandon the White Tower? Hamill explained that they had already discussed it with him, but he was still unaware of the specific details. A knock on Frank's door prompted a yell from inside. Grank, is that you? Get in here, Oscar thought to himself. Who in the world was Grank to the heir of the Empire's largest trading company? From within, Frank simply groaned. Dude, I can hear every single word you're saying, he called out. The mage then asked him bluntly, So, you're truly leaving the White Tower? The young man apologized for keeping the news quiet. But I have to return to my post and help the family business until I get married. Oscar's attention sharpened. Wait, married? Are you dating someone? Frank just shrugged nonchalantly. Apparently, she's a decent person, from a good family, and she's beautiful. So, it is what it is. But Oscar insisted. That's not the point. Are you seriously just going to give up on magic? Frank's voice was heavy with defeat. What else am I supposed to do? It was my one and only real talent. I genuinely thought I was something special. But it's clear I'm at the bottom of the barrel in this magic tower. At least I could have been a big fish in a small pond. But since that's impossible, I guess I always knew this was coming. I can't just stay here going nowhere, and I understand my family's perspective on my return. But Oscar simply repeated his name, his tone grave. Frank. Frank looked back, unsettled. Why are you saying my name so strangely? Frank wonders aloud if it's because he called the tower weak, but Oscar cuts through his doubt. You're talented. The words land with a weight that visibly moves Frank, who can only stammer, wow, thanks. Hearing that from a genius on my way out. That's pretty incredible. Oscar presses his advantage. So, do you want to take a shot at becoming that legend? Just then, the door bursts open and a man strides in, calling for Frank before sizing up Oscar. This your friend? Look, I'll give my little brother 5 minutes to hurry up and meet me. You can finish your tearful goodbyes. But Oscar interjects, his voice firm and clear. How much? What's your price for Frank to remain at the tower? Frank is floored, asking who he thinks he is, which prompts Oscar to simply state his own name. The name clicks instantly, and the man realizes he's facing the renowned mage who created the miracle medicine. He formally introduces himself. I am Grank of the Sirius family, the older brother of this fool, right here. Oscar begins to make an offer, but Grank scoffs dismissively. You're playing with fire, kid, so the rumors of you being a genius are true? You have some serious nerve attempting to negotiate with the Sirius family. Oscar's reply is calm and confident. It wouldn't be a bad deal for either of us. I intend to turn Frank into one of the top mages in this tower in just 2 years. In the long run, he'll be a massive asset for your family. Grank repeats the claim with disbelief, then asks, and what is the penalty if you should fail? Oscar doesn't hesitate. I will sign over 50 years of profits from the Iskadane flu vaccine deal directly to the Sirius family. An elder mage in the room suddenly challenges him. And who gave you the authority to make such a promise? Oh, just the vice master of the tower, Oscar replies casually. Grank squints, his expression shifting as he reevaluates him. So, is Frank truly talented, or is this merely a charitable act for a friend? Grank demands, getting to the point. Obviously, it's because the young man is a star. Oscar shoots back. I'm planning to make the White Tower a powerhouse once more, a complete revitalization in under 5 years. Consider this the very first step in that plan, and for that, I need Frank. He's the secret ingredient to my entire plan. He's the key to the brand new White Tower I have in the works. Grank looked at me like I was just a kid, but hey, he said he wasn't one to stop an enemy from making a foolish move, but that he would attach one small condition. I was thinking my offer was already a bargain, but he just nodded and said, You've overlooked something. We merchants value trust far more than money, and I don't make deals with just anyone. Not until they prove they are the real deal. I have a level 5 knight on my security detail, and tomorrow, your man is going to fight him. I had to ask, you do realize he's a level 2 mage, correct? It's like sending a rowboat against a warship, Grank just added. As a condition, my guard cannot use his key sword. I thought, fantastic. This guy isn't giving up, likely because some strategic marriage is hanging in the balance. Then the old man concluded, see you at noon. If you fail to appear, I'll simply assume you lost your nerve. I sat there thinking, heck, even I would have a seriously tough time with a challenge like that. A level 5 knight is no joke, and Frank was staring at me, wide-eyed, asking, so what's the plan, boss? You can totally call this off right now, he stammered. My brother's already promised to thrash me for being a coward. But look, if you're too embarrassed to back down, I'll go through with it. I just said, oh, I could easily do it if I were a level 4 mage. Frank just stared blankly at me. And how exactly do you intend to reach level 4 in a single day? But I told him, for me, it's impossible. But for a level 3 mage to reach level 4, that is a different story entirely. Your brother never specified that I had to win the fight myself, only that I had to prove my capabilities. And I'm going to show him. Frank, I declared, because I'm going to make you a level 4 mage, and you're going to fight for me. The next thing you know, we're in the training room on the 40th floor, and Frank is already whining. How am I supposed to accomplish in one day what I couldn't do in years? I replied calmly. Dude, it's possible. Just relax into a natural pose. Don't make it look so forced and awkward. Close your eyes and feel the mana coursing through you. Synchronize with its flow. I complimented his form, then gently pressed on a few key points, saying, see, here, and here. You're bleeding mana all over the place when you circulate it. That's precisely why your magic level is completely stagnant. Frank's expression was one of pure shock. Wait, you geniuses can actually see that? So if I just patch the leaks, I'll level up? But I had to manage his expectations. At your current level, it's not a critical issue. Most mages remain blissfully unaware of such things. But, for that top 1%, the masters they call archmages, they obsess over it. So, starting now, welcome to boot camp. Every morning, we are going to get your mana circuits running with absolute flawless precision. It needs to feel as instinctive as breathing. Frank asked, "Is that all?" And I replied, "Oh, my friend, we are just getting warmed up. Now, show it to me. The unique magic you used during the incident in the herb field." Frank froze instantly. "I can't." I thought perhaps he didn't trust me, but he quickly shot that idea down. "This isn't about trust. I'm scared of it," he insisted, repeating the words to ensure I understood the depth of his fear. He explained that he had nearly died using that spell once before, and the anxiety had only festered as he got older. It stemmed from his family, who were prepared to cast him out if he didn't start producing the results of a true mage. He felt he had to achieve something no one else could even imagine, a feat that couldn't be copied. He had wondered, what if not just a part of him, but his entire physical form could simply transform into wind? He would have become unbelievably powerful, but it was an incredibly reckless and ill-conceived idea. For a brief, exhilarating second, he thought it was working, but then he realized something was terribly wrong with his own body. He was dematerializing into a wisp of smoke and simply vanishing. As half of him faded away, his mana spiraled violently out of control. He screamed desperately for anyone, for any help at all. If the Tower Master hadn't been coincidentally strolling by, he would have been utterly annihilated. He would have been completely erased from existence, not to mention the gut-wrenching feeling of having your very soul shattered into a million pieces. It was an experience he had no desire to repeat, ever. Oscar mentions that he already used it on the hill, but Frank warns him that the ability just activates automatically whenever a situation gets dangerous. Frank calls the limitation pathetic, but Oscar immediately shuts that down, telling him not to think that way. He explains that most mages encounter a similar roadblock, and the solution is often surprisingly simple. In Frank's case, his entire magic revolves around controlling his mana. He just needs to master that control. Frank scoffs, retorting that mana control is a matter of pure, innate talent. Oscar concedes that's usually true, but reveals there's a little-known workaround to force the issue. As he begins to draw a complex circle on the ground, Frank panics, thinking Oscar is about to make a pact with a demon. But his friend just scoffs at the idea. He clarifies that a demon wouldn't even bother to answer his call. His real plan was to summon a wind spirit to infuse into Frank's body. Taking the cue, Frank starts formally introducing himself to the empty air, asking it to embody purity within him, but he's met with absolute silence. Oscar dryly comments, "Wow, your connection with spirits is terrible." Frank weakly protests, claiming he felt a slight breeze just now, but his friend shoots back, "Dude, that was me, sighing at your pathetic attempt." As Frank begins to complain, Oscar tells him not to get discouraged. After all, practically no humans are on speaking terms with spirits anyway. His friend whines, "Then why did you get my hopes up? If I can't summon a spirit, I can't control my mana." But the mage remains calm, assuring him, "Relax, I have another trick up my sleeve." It was a special technique he had learned during a visit to the Elf Kingdom in his previous life. He recalls having pulled it off just for fun back then, so he was confident it would work again. Frank asks if he should try the chant once more, but his buddy tells him to step aside, because he was going to handle it personally. Believing that the King of Spirits would surely remember him, Oscar closes his eyes. He visualizes himself not in this drab training room, but standing before the magnificent and ancient world tree. Then, with authority in his voice, he calls out to the wind spirit, commanding it to come to him. Frank can only stare in disbelief, muttering, "What was that?" And incredibly, he succeeded on his very first attempt, causing the wind spirit to materialize before him. It inquired, "Was that a human who summoned me? It has been 27 years since I was last called." Aiden recognized it as the one, and stated his purpose plainly. He desired a contract. When he asked about the necessary paperwork, the spirit simply laughed. "We have no need for such formalities. Does this human wish to form a bond of friendship with the highest of spirits? Celestine?" it asked. And Aiden just stood there. "No," he replied, thinking to himself that he should have led with his true intentions. He didn't need a spirit for himself. He had only summoned the Great Spirit for the sake of his friend. The next day, inside the dueling hall, the stage was set. Kalen casually asked the vice leader if he had slept well, to which Alara gave a curt confirmation. The young master then checked. "Are you comfortable with the schedule?" The older man agreed, muttering under his breath. He grumbled that the one who created the cure was a truly troublesome individual. before Kaelin presented the knight for the day's duel. The red-haired warrior announced herself as Seraphina Morgan, a level 5 knight, and Aiden, in turn, introduced himself. Kaelin then laid out the rules of engagement, a game of magical tag where the first to seize the other's necklace would be the victor. Furthermore, if Aiden couldn't secure a win within 5 minutes, it would be an automatic defeat for him. Sounds fair enough. Let's begin, Aiden replied coolly, prompting Kaelin to mock. If you wish to forfeit, just raise your hand. He then gestured to Aiden's attire, asking, seriously, are you fine with that? Aiden simply nodded. It's fine, since I'm not the one fighting. At that moment, Finn stepped forward to face his brother, leaving Kaelin utterly stunned and speechless. What is the meaning of this? Kaelin demanded. To which Aiden calmly explained, you told me to prove my ability. You never specified that I had to be the one to fight. I spent all of yesterday coaching my friend here, Aiden elaborated. Kaelin scoffed. Fine. My mistake for not clarifying, but you don't truly believe I'll go easy on Finn, do you? No, Aiden said with a slight smile. I just figured a level 4 mage has far better odds than a level 2 mage, leaving Kaelin sputtering in rage. A level 4 mage? Wasn't he just a level 3 yesterday? Aiden casually replies, hey, to make Leo a top-tier mage in 2 years, he needs to demonstrate this level of progress. Lord Grant then orders Sir Kael, do not dare hold back, and his knight's expression turns deadly serious. Aiden gives Leo a supportive clap on the back, telling him, don't you get cold feet now, because if you execute everything we practiced yesterday, you have absolutely got this in the bag. The young blue-haired mage nods with determination, promising, I will return in one piece. Sir Kael simply remarks, it has been a while, and his young master nods in return. With that, the time had come for the duel to begin. The match starts with Leo retreating, attempting to create a space of about 20 meters between them. But he could already sense something was profoundly wrong due to the crushing pressure rolling off Sir Kael in waves. Even without his primary sword, and from this considerable distance, the man was still an absolute monster. That's the power of a Class 5 knight for you. As Leo thinks, is it too late to run? Aiden notices his friend's hesitation. And then, a crucial memory surfaces in Leo's mind Aiden's words, telling him he was needed. He remembered that he was handpicked to be a cornerstone of Aiden's new magical tower, and since they had already lost their swordsman, their entire plan would be completely ruined without him. With renewed resolve, Leo clenches his fist, launching a vicious blade of wind straight at the knight. He fights now because, for the first time in his entire life, someone actually told him that he was needed, and there was no way he could ever let that person down. Sir Kael casually parries the magical blades with his sword, thinking to himself that the boy had improved considerably. He's using jewel casting to disperse the impact, he mused. Is he attempting to replicate that legendary sword control technique from the Eastern Kingdoms? But he blocks the final attack with his own blade. The wind blade freezes, suspended in midair as Sir Kael begins his charge, thinking, okay, I have seen enough. Leo is seized with panic. The knight is far too fast. In a desperate attempt to halt the charge, he conjures a fire. Grank stared in disbelief at the giant wind palm conjured by Frank's blade magic. How had he mastered that in half a day? Did you two use some forbidden power-up? He demanded, but Oscar remained utterly calm, simply saying, relax. There's no need to worry. We used a completely legitimate method. His growth was exponential, but this was his current limit. Frank simply lacks the natural constitution of a battle mage, and he is undeniably weaker than his peers. Forcing him to level up would only get him injured, and to be honest, that might have been a relief. It is far better for him to become a corporate worker than to be broken in battle and cause the family to panic. He would be too terrified to ever attempt advancing his magic again. But just in that moment, Leslie lunged forward, his hand about to snatch the blue necklace. Oscar just smirked and whispered, game over. Grank whipped his head around to his friend, wondering about the source of that unnerving smile. In a flashback to the night before, Oscar had declared the spirit transplant a complete success and asked a question. So, can you use your wind god magic? Frank confirmed. Yes, it feels entirely natural now, the mage stated. You cannot achieve a full wind body just yet, since you haven't fully overcome your trauma. So Frank asked if there was no chance of winning tomorrow, but Oscar immediately shut that notion down. If you use the wind god, your odds are 100%. He then asked what Frank thought of transforming his entire body into wind. Is that everything? His teacher then gave him one last warning. He was told not to be reckless, but Frank believed he could not win unless he used the wind god. As Leslie approached, Frank knew he had to decide now. And now, for the core of his power, the most game-breaking ability of all, a special trick that turns anything he wears into pure wind. Yes, you heard correctly. It is the most ridiculously overpowered perk of being the wind god's chosen one, but you have to save your best moves for the finale. Winning too easily is just dreadfully boring, and it's far more entertaining to be dancing around Leslie's attacks. So Frank simply continues his waltz, and snatches the necklace directly from the knight's hand, leaving the man utterly stunned. The knight can only stare, thinking, well, I guess that settles it. Frank closes his fist around the necklace, and instantly, it erupts in a brilliant flash of light. I finally did it, Frank shouts in triumph, while Grank jolts to his feet, thinking, wait a minute. The magic doctor swore he would never use that power again. Nearby, Hamill just chuckles to himself. Well, folks, it appears we have a winner, he announces, then asks if anyone objects. Of course, Oscar is already clapping his friend on the back in celebration. Grank just stands there, muttering in disbelief. Wait, didn't he say he'd only trained for a single day? He finally hangs his head, accepting defeat. As Frank shakes the knight's hand, Hamill chimes in again. You two worked so hard to reach this point. It's a shame to see one of you leave so soon. But Grank cuts him off. Just, look after my little brother for me, will you? I think he's grown up a bit. Then, shaking his head, he adds, never mind, and storms away. Frank stands there in silence, and Oscar can't help but think to himself, what a character. A wide grin spreads across Frank's face, but he plays it cool, pretending he didn't hear a word of it. Fast forward to the next day. Frank looks around confused. Is this the right place? Why does my new training room look suspiciously like a dungeon? This is a basement prison, isn't it? Frank asks, to which Oscar casually replies, it's got character. It's been in use for hundreds of years, Oscar adds, but yeah, you're not wrong. Frank begins to whine. Why do I have to train in solitary confinement? Oscar explains. Hey, the Vice Master himself ordered it. He has big plans for you, kid, but Frank is not having it. Complaining, solitary confinement after only one day off? Are you serious? Oscar just tells him, look on the bright side. All you have to do is help out the spirit. Frank just moans in response. Yeah, I guess. But his friend shoots back. Stop being such a baby. It's not like you're going to perish down here. Frank mutters under his breath. Are you absolutely sure about that? Before they finally part ways. In his head, however, Oscar is thinking, sorry, pal, because in reality, this whole isolation chamber was his idea from the start. That night, in the quiet aftermath of the duel, Hamill approached Oscar with a question. Are you certain you want to confine Frank for 30 days? The boy just won a monumental victory, he pressed, but Oscar's resolve was unshakable. Trust me, he replied, he needs this. The vice leader sighed, relenting. Very well, we'll ensure his comfort for the month. On a more positive note, I have good news from the Sirius Company. They've just offered us the use of their entire distribution network, with absolutely no strings attached. Oscar's first question cut straight to the point. Wait, for free? His mind was already calculating the variables, a familiar corporate strategy clicking into place. That was a fast move, he thought to himself. They were betting heavily on the White Tower's resurgence, anticipating massive returns if Frank ascended to become a legendary mage. Recognizing the gamble, he couldn't truly fault their business sense. Well, he said aloud. That is some exceptionally good news then. Hamill nodded, shifting gears. All right, item number 2 on our agenda. How would you feel about conducting a lecture for the 5th years? Oscar considered it for a moment. I suppose I could, he answered, though his mind was already elsewhere. Didn't Hamill just instruct me to focus on the potion department? He decided to ask directly, is there a particular reason the White Tower needs a sudden and massive power boost? A faint grin touched Hamill's lips. You catch on quickly. Have you ever heard of the Night of the Mages? It's an annual event where wizards from across the Empire are meant to gather, he explained. It was originally conceived as a day for them to showcase their skills in perfect harmony, the Emperor's grand plan for building unity among mages. But in reality, that ideal was never achieved. The entire gathering invariably descends into chaos. It turns into a colossal magical free-for-all every single time. The event was cancelled years ago because of it. Oscar immediately saw the implication. So why bring it up now? Is the Emperor planning to revive the Night of the Mages? Hamill's expression grew grim. You've hit the nail on the head. It's still being kept quiet for now, but they're planning a major announcement around the new year, and I'm getting a deeply unsettling feeling from the Black Tower. If they continue their aggressive campaign to become one of the 4 major towers, there's a strong chance the White Tower will become their primary target. Frankly, the possibility has me on edge, Hamill confessed. Oscar's face became a mask of neutrality as he simply said, "I'm on it," prompting Hamill to immediately call him out on the sudden emotional shield. Meanwhile, high up on the 36th floor of the Magic Tower's campus, Oscar mused that the White Tower was clearly making a power play, and they were certainly arrogant about it. Still, he felt a wave of relief, knowing Frank was now a solid level 4. The entire ceremony for a low-level spirit had been a blatant show of force, and he was immensely grateful, thinking a demigod likely wouldn't even bother to remember a puny human like him. Fast forward to another day. During another spirit summoning, a spirit materializes, demanding, "All right, who is the wise guy? Summoning one of us just to play messenger for other people?" Oscar calmly replied, "Whoa there, take a chill pill." He then called out for Silvarian of the Silence, asking him to spread the word that the white mage had officially returned. The spirit scoffed. "You have some serious nerve, dropping the Spirit King's name so casually." But at that moment, a swarm of shimmering butterflies began to materialize from thin air. The spirit was completely floored, stammering, "Wow, what in the... You summoned the King of Spirits with a single word?" Oscar just smirked. "Where's the fun in doing things the hard way?" he asked, before requesting a small favor. The spirit relayed the message that the Queen had approved a simple transplant, with no contract necessary. The mage replied, "Perfect. Tell her I said thank you." But the spirit added a warning, and she said not to forget that little promise you made. The young man simply thought, "Relax, my lady, I've got this," fully intending to keep his word and save the White Tower families. Because of that promise, he also planned to pay her back with interest, using a profoundly boring paper from his lecture on the reinterpretation of basic magic. But before any of that, he had some family business to attend to. Just then, a man in a sharp suit strolled in, remarking, Well, look at all these familiar faces. The last I saw of you lot, I thought you'd all be pushing up daisies by now. Is this lecture only for level 3s? Because I'm not seeing any of the big shots," his companion asked mockingly. "Perhaps it's because it's a basic class, and all the truly powerful mages are busy," a girl nearby chimed in. "The White Tower must have some serious funding. I heard the Vice Master himself personally invited this lecturer." The entire venue was under imperial surveillance, which had all his friends buzzing with anticipation. "This instructor must be a pretty big deal. I can't wait." But then, one student scoffs, "Don't make me laugh. Holding a lecture in this dusty old hall that nobody ever uses? Please." And, of course, the loudmouth is Damien Proud. He was the one and only son of the prestigious Proud family, prompting the girls to mutter, "Geez, Damien. Way to kill the mood." But another student countered, "No, it's an investment. If they were merely trying to copy the other magic towers, they wouldn't be rehashing basic magic. I mean, just look around you. There are 32 people here. Only a single one of the lower-ranked mages didn't bother to show up. So this was bound to be a great lesson, just as he predicted. He was therefore positive that even the so-called noble level 2 prodigy would make an appearance as well. But then, a sudden presence cut through the chatter, and the entire room fell into a dead silence. The blonde student thought to himself, "I can't hear a thing. It's so quiet." Then, Oscar casually strolled into the room. "Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to meet you. As of right now, I am the one who will be teaching you about the reinterpretation of basic magic. My name's Oscar, by the way." As soon as he spoke, a wave of whispers swept through the students. "Wait, this guy is only a level 2? Oscar continued. "I know many of you are incredibly disappointed that I'm the one up here." He thought, "Yep, I can feel the disappointment from here. A low-level mage teaching a class. The absolute nerve. He must feel pretty awkward about being unable to use magic himself." Oscar announced, "All right, if any of you are having second thoughts, you are completely free to leave right now. You're not young academy students under my thumb anymore. But, there is one small condition. You have to prove that you're too advanced for this. Show me that you don't need this lesson, but the clock is ticking. You have 10 minutes, and within that time, you must verbally state that you are leaving my class." The test seemed deceptively simple, but a current of discontent washed over the students, who had just been forcefully silenced by the very same instructor. They were utterly unable to speak, yet he now demanded they do just that. This was no mere jest. As a level 2 mage, his challenge was a genuine magical crucible. This was clearly no ordinary silencing charm, but it had been intricately woven with a solution waiting to be found. In essence, his message was a cold one. If you lack the insight to even free your own voice, then you have proven you belong in this classroom. Oscar mused to himself, "I intentionally left subtle clues within the spell's matrix, but that doesn't make it a walk in the park." As the final grain of sand was about to fall, he prodded, "So, is that it? No takers at all?" Then, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Damien slammed his hands on the table, his voice erupting. "I've got it." Oscar's mind flashed. "Wait, isn't that the student from the beginner's circle?" Damien wore a look of immense self-satisfaction as Oscar congratulated him, to which the boy simply replied, "Phew, that was a piece of cake. Far easier than I anticipated," he added. "I just, took my time with it." As the timer chimed, the silencing spell shattered, and Oscar addressed the room. "All right, quiet down, everyone. Time is up," he announced. "And it seems only Damien has passed this initial test." Damien scoffed. "Well, of course. So, I'm excused, correct? No need for me to attend class?" The professor affirmed. "You are." The prince watched, thinking, "Incredible, he actually let him leave," the prince thought to himself. "Now I'm genuinely curious about what we're supposed to learn in here." A faint smirk played on Oscar's lips. This child is an open book. I can practically see every one of his thoughts. So he said, "As a reward for being our lone victor, I shall teach you a spell personally. Tell me, which of the basics is your favorite?" And without a moment of hesitation, Damien replied, "Wind Slash, obviously." The teacher then gave him an instruction. "All right, let's see it." The student groaned as if it were a tremendous burden, conjured the magic, and asked, "There. Are you happy now?" "Not bad," Oscar admitted. "And for your reward, today I will teach you a genuine wind slash." Damien looked confused. Did you not just see that blade of magic? Floating right in front of me?" The teacher scoffed. "By my standards, that was a crude and poorly formed imitation. You have two significant problems with your technique," he explained, smoothly producing a small knife and continuing. "First of all, that construct was not made of wind. Allow me to ask you, what do you believe wind actually is?" The boy began to speak. "It's moving air," Oscar clarifies. "But unlike water in a puddle, which is still water, or fire, which is still fire regardless of size, wind is fundamentally air in constant motion. That is precisely why your wind slash was a complete failure. Just as stagnant water becomes foul, magic composed of air simply dissipates if it ceases to move. That's the core principle of the White Tower, the very institution dedicated to wind magic. In short, the magic must perpetually flow. If it doesn't, it will be torn apart, just as I demonstrated moments ago." Damien then asks, "And the other problem?" Oscar sighs. "You're expending far too much mana to cast that spell. You'd see immense improvement by simply being more efficient. Once your magical proficiency reaches a certain point, you can discern a great deal just by observing an opponent. You can read their entire personality, their tendencies. You can even glimpse fragments of their past, and because you hail from that renowned family, you naturally tried to emulate their techniques. You attempted to copy their signature wind slash before you had even mastered the fundamentals. That's an incredibly ambitious leap, especially considering it's one of the most complex basic spells. So, you compensated by overloading it with more mana than necessary, and that has become a critical flaw in your technique," Oscar concludes. "But now that we've identified the root cause, you can achieve a perfect wind slash once you correct it. Too bad you've already lost your prized pupil," a classmate taunts. Losing him would be quite the setback. But Damien abruptly stops, turning back with a smirk. "Whoever said I was leaving," he declares, striding back to his throne. Or rather, his seat. 3 weeks later, the academy is buzzing with talk of Oscar's incredible teaching prowess. He's being called the new superstar among instructors. A student asks, "Yeah, but is he effective for us intermediate-level mages?" His friend scoffs, "Dude, even some of the 4th and 5th level prodigies are auditing his class." The first student looks intrigued. "So, should we try to get in?" The blue-haired student replies, "Honestly, I was hoping you'd ask. Let's get moving. I have a group of 7 all set and ready to go. The class starts at 9, and we absolutely have to get there early. Seriously, if we show up late, we might not even get a seat." And just like that, every student in the cafeteria, who had been masterfully pretending not to eavesdrop, suddenly shot to their feet, buzzing with anticipation. Inside the actual classroom, hushed whispers began to circulate. Why are so many level 4 and 5 mages showing up for Magic 101? Heck, even Elder Maxim is here. This was starting to feel less like a simple class, and more like a full-blown magic convention. At that moment, Oscar strolled in with the air of a celebrity, greeting them, "Good morning, everyone." He then announced that the spell they were about to learn was of the utmost importance, so it was a very good thing they all decided to show up. The students erupted with excitement, and Oscar continued, explaining that this spell would basically become their closest companion for their entire career as mages. And that spell was the basic wind spell. The entire class shared a single thought. You mean the most elementary spell of all time? The one we learned the day we first set foot in the White Tower? Maxim chimed in. Oh, don't mind me. I'm just observing. But I have to ask, are you seriously about to teach the basic wind spell to this crowd? Oscar just smiled and confirmed it. He then turned to the elder. Say, could you give us a little demonstration, Maxim? Maxim obliged, unleashing a hurricane-level wind spell that was so powerful it practically blew everyone in the room off their feet. He smirked. How's that for a demonstration? Oscar simply nodded. Perfect, thank you. He then pointed to a student. Annie Raven, you're up. Do the same spell. The young woman looked startled. Why me? There are so many better mages here. But despite her hesitation, she cast the wind spell as requested. The students murmured amongst themselves. Her spell felt like a gentle, warm hug. Oscar then addressed them. All right, class. Who can spot the difference? Everyone started shouting out the obvious answers like strength and range. But then a particularly bright student in the back mumbled something more profound. Something about mana temperament. Oscar's eyes instantly lit up. Veronica Frick, you've nailed it. Just as she said, there's a fundamental difference in the very vibe of the mana they created, and what's truly wild is that the entire process, from start to finish, was exactly the same. One of them felt like a scorching desert blast, while the other was as gentle as a spring breeze. The difference was so immense, you could hardly call them the same spell. Which brings me to my next question. Who here can tell me what, precisely, mana temperament even is? One student began to ramble about the 4 types of mana, but the teacher cut him off. No, that's a completely different concept, my friend. It's about how you yourself understand mana. You must all learn the founding principles of the White Tower. In other words, balance. So, a pop quiz. Why are the white and blue towers our primary examples? A student guessed it was about the elements, and Oscar confirmed. Bingo. The red and gold towers are all about brute force and speed, but they have zero subtlety. Only wind and water possess the duality of being either hot or cold. This is the very symbol of balance, and that clear distinction is what makes the white and blue towers so special. It all comes down to how they master that balance. For example, the recipe for boiling water is quite simple. You need standard atmospheric pressure, 100 degrees, and a little bit of time. It's an elementary process. However, creating hot wind is far easier than boiling water. And mastering that control is simpler still. You can change nature like a chameleon, making the room frigid in an instant. Wind is the ultimate free spirit of the elements. It can pack a punch like the flames of the red tower, or strike with the swiftness of the gold tower's lightning. Or it can simply go with the flow, like the water of the blue tower. But its versatility doesn't end there. The blue tower's water is selective. It cannot mix with oil. But wind is the ultimate free spirit. It can possess whatever personality your mage's heart can dream up. Wind is the ultimate social butterfly. It is compatible with literally everything, which means you students of the White Tower must get your priorities straight. You have to define your personal relationship with the wind. You must ask yourself, what is wind to me? And that, my friends, was the entire point of the day's lecture. At that moment, a student next to the old man began to speak out of turn. Just as Maxim was having a profound, internal conversation with the breeze, Oscar interrupted sharply. Whoa, pump the brakes, buddy. Don't do a thing, as the old-timer continues his sweet monologue to the air, sending the teacher into a visible panic. But Maxim remains perfectly composed. No, I've got this. I'm absolutely sure of it, he thought. It's happening. But Oscar was waving his arms frantically like a man possessed. Don't you dare touch him. Everybody back up now. Give the man some room. You're going to shatter his moment of breakthrough. The students were all murmuring, completely baffled, until Oscar snapped, Duh. Maxim's leveling up, people. This is an awakening. And just like that, the elder's eyes snapped open. The young man asked if he was all right, and Maxim could only manage a heavy sigh. Still, not level 8. He thanked Oscar for running interference, but Oscar just waved it off, saying, Hey, I'm the teacher here. I should be the one thanking you, Maxime, for the free masterclass. The young man's thoughts, however, were far more calculating. Now my classes will be a total cakewalk, he schemed internally, and not a single student is going to step out of line. All those nobodies beneath me can just stay where they belong, he thought. But the real prize was noticing Veronica Fricks in that crowd. He had actually managed to get the undivided attention of one of the Academy's most infamous troublemakers. He'd read every detail about her in Oscar's confidential little journal. The next day, our protagonist was walking through the tower, deep in thought. Veronica said there was something impressive in the training room, and she was likely only being friendly because she actually liked my performance. He was certain she was giving him that specific look, That sympathetic glance because he clearly had no idea where the gym was located. He finally reached a door and hesitated, thinking, is this the spot? He'd heard that this was one of the special rooms. 3 of the 13 training facilities supposedly looked like this, but their doors were each painted a different color, he recalled. So, is this one for VIPs or something? I mean, they wouldn't go to all this effort if it wasn't some kind of sophisticated enchanted door. A magic door that only opens when you touch it just right. Maxim looked up, sensing the strange aura emanating from it, when a voice boomed, "Greetings. I am Argo, your next-generation workout partner." And Maxim's immediate thought was, ah, magical engineering. So those arrogant fools from the Gold Tower were behind this. They must have blown the entire budget on this single project. They surely siphoned all the available funds for this glorified recreational room. Meanwhile, Argo's disembodied voice continued. Please register your information for a personalized training plan. But Oscar declines, choosing to proceed incognito, which means he must select his own training difficulty. With 100 levels available for personalized training, Oscar simply requests to begin at level 1. A seemingly effortless start. The system confirms his choice, and instantly, 3 orbs materialize with instructions. Destroy them with either magic or physical strikes. However, the use of wide-area spells is strictly forbidden to prevent cheating. But the young mage dispatches the orbs with ease. In an instant, level 1 is complete. Oscar considers it a mere warm-up, deciding it's time to increase the intensity. As Argo chimes in, so, what's your next move, champion? Which level will you choose? Without a moment's pause, the mage declares, level 100. The system reacts with sheer astonishment, warning him that the orbs will become incredibly small and move at blinding speeds. It further explains that the orbs will actively try to disorient him, and if the situation becomes overwhelming, he has an escape. He can simply hit the cancel button. Oscar can't help but wonder what level of mastery is truly required to navigate such chaos. Just then, a blur of light streaks past his head, and Argo announces, "All right, hero. Your mission is to destroy all 1,000 of these orbs using either magic or a well-aimed physical strike. The previous rules still apply. No wide-area spells. If you're struck more than 10 times, the simulation will end." Oscar immediately unleashes 3 blades of wind, attempting to slice through a line of the fast-moving targets, quickly realizing his predicament. He must destroy them rapidly before his mana is completely depleted, so he decides it's time to escalate his efforts. He summons a flurry of additional wind daggers, which begin to successfully intercept the orbs as Oscar thinks with satisfaction. Making the projectiles larger and sharper was clearly the right strategy, but then, a sudden realization dawns on him. He feels as though he's using advanced techniques on a fundamental training exercise. At that moment, Argo congratulates him for clearing level 100. Sprawled on the floor in exhaustion, Oscar can only manage to reply, "Yeah, that was a decent warm-up." He reflects on the fact that the mages of this new generation must endure such rigorous training from the very first day. The standard for excellence is now astronomically higher, meaning he must push himself even further to surpass them, and plans to eat more to pack on some muscle. When right on cue, Veronica strolls into the room. "I'm surprised you actually showed up," she remarks, to which Oscar casually replies, "Just here to get an early start." He calls out for someone named Verna, but Veronica cuts in, "I figured you'd just ignore what I said." Oscar plays it off smoothly. "Nah, I just came to visit. My philosophy is that a healthy mana reserve makes for a healthy body." She immediately calls his bluff. "Isn't that a quote from Oscar Sage? Did you eat something strange this morning?" She wonders why he's trying to pass off Oscar Sage's famous line as his own, and why this total jerk, who always looked down on her for being a noble, even though they were both orphans, suddenly seems to have had a personality transplant. Shaking it off, she tells Argo to prepare a level 50 warm-up, then asks if the rankings have changed and if Killian's still on top. But Argo cryptically reveals that there has, in fact, been an update. Intrigued, Veronica tells it to pull up the new rankings. She sees the name AA at the top and questions who it is, but Argo stops her. It states that due to personal information security, it cannot reveal the name. Veronica wonders if it might be an elder, but she immediately shoots that idea down, reasoning that you have to be below level 5 to even be ranked. Yet this person somehow shattered the 10-minute demon record. Argo then confirms he was the very first person to ever do it. But when Veronica demands to know who it is, the system just repeats its personal security excuse. A thought strikes her, and she asks if it was Oscar who crushed the record, but Argo just gives her the same old answer. Elsewhere, our hero is walking down the hall, wondering if he's going to be incredibly sore later. His thoughts are interrupted when he runs right into Elder Maxim. Oscar greets him, and the Elder says his timing is perfect. He explains that he has something to ask, mentioning that Fidelina reported that the merchants have stopped buying their potions. He's sure it's the Azure Tower's fault, and figures that, as a member of the production team, Oscar must know something. Oscar, however, walks away, completely irritated by the whole situation. His mind shifts from those pathetic rivals to the immediate puzzle of why the coffee line is impossibly long today. A nearby student remarks that an email was sent to the 1st through 5th posts, asking if he'd heard the news that started today. They are all receiving a pay raise. Oscar immediately deduces they must be delivery workers, and his colleague confirms it. He remarks that they're finally catching a break, but the young mage begins analyzing the situation with a strategist's eye. He considers that the delivery sector can't be a significant market because it requires a massive workforce. The pay isn't great, it offers no real power, and the only tangible benefit is earning positive ratings from the citizens. A red-haired delivery worker mentions that the elders are providing them with food as a reward for their tireless efforts. That specific detail ignites an idea in Oscar's mind. He politely approaches them. "Excuse me, when you're making deliveries, do you often have to meet the recipients in person?" The delivery workers confirm, "Yes, absolutely." They explain it's necessary to get a signature on the container itself as undeniable proof of delivery. Oscar thanks them profusely, stating it was a huge help, and then quickly departs as a plan forms. We then see him presenting his findings to Hamill. Hamill clarifies, asking if Oscar is proposing door-to-door deliveries, to which the mage agrees with complete conviction. The old man then outlines the core problem. The merchants they relied on were essentially out of commission. Their attempts to sell directly to the people had failed, leaving their valuable potions to simply gather dust. Oscar then reveals his solution. He's developing something entirely new. A look of intrigue crosses Hamill's face at the mention of innovation, but the young mage quickly tempers expectations, clarifying that it's simply a modification of a mid-tier formula. He explains it's a healing potion that is already incredibly popular at the White Tower, one that they can easily adapt. The plan is to refine this magical concoction and split it into 4 distinct versions, customized for different ages and genders. Oscar's mind is already racing, mapping out the specific formulas for each of the 4 potions to meet the public's needs perfectly. A few days later, an elderly man sits on a bench, complaining about how old he's become and how he's constantly running on empty. A delivery man approaches with a familiar tone. "Hey, it's good to see you're still in one piece after yesterday. I have a letter for you today," he announces, and a hopeful grin spreads across the old man's face, thinking, "My companions, they must still be alive." The delivery man then casually adds that the senders were from the Centennial generation. The old man looks bewildered. "The what now?" "I'm only 80, he grumbles, groaning that his head feels like a cannonball from his complete lack of energy. Seeing his opening, the delivery man leans in and asks the old man, "Why don't you try this?" He produces a potion, boasting that it's the latest and greatest innovation from his own magic tower. It's a little pick-me-up called S0. And that's where our tale concludes for now. If you've enjoyed the journey, please do us a favor and press that like and subscribe button. We'll catch you on the next one.